For many among us, there was that one day in their life they wrote their first lines of programming code. For many, the first programming exercise was to get, in one way or another, the words "Hello World" on their screen. 35 years ago, while I was writing my first code, I was not expecting to use the words "Hello World" to open a cybersecurity event online. And yes, those are the words that I have to use right now. Hello World. And that is because people from all over the world, from like 55 different countries, have registered for this online event. So we are covering quite some time zones, from Australia to the US West Coast, from Asia, Russia to South Africa. We have at the moment 1,143 people that have registered for this event, and we are still counting. And we have already more than 400 people that have logged in and are live online and still coming in. So the counter is ticking. For those who are attending for the first time or don't know what CCB stands for, CCB is the Center for Cybersecurity Belgium. Under the authority of the Prime Minister of Belgium, we organize our quarterly cyber threat research event every 3 months. This is normally a live event in Belgium, but due to the COVID situation, now everything is online. And the advantage is that we can open it for the whole international cyber community. My name is Pedro Deryckere. I'm the head of CCB Cyprus, which is the CTI department of the CCB, and I'll be your host for today. 1,143 people registered. I cannot imagine that you all are here for my good lookings, but that's probably because we are offering an interesting agenda. And what do we have on the menu today? First, after me, you will have a short introduction by our director, Miguel de Bruycker, who will give a short introduction about CCB. After Miguel, we have a story about new observations of the Zebra Sea activity. It's called a Zebra and Gopher's clothing. Only the text already makes me curious. And the third topic on the agenda is our traditional cyber expert panel hosted by Kevin Holvoet. Normally then we will have a short break, and after a break we will talk about IBM X-Force cold chain research, and afterwards, followed by, I think, the story of 2020, FireEye's research about the SolarWinds supply chain attack, brought to you by Ron Bushar, the Senior Vice President and CTO of FireEye Mandiant. And last, but certainly not least, another story about SolarWinds, but this time about the missing link, brought to you by Costin and Raiu, the director of the Kaspersky. Great team. Before we start with the presentations, I want to explain a little bit to you how we use this platform. You see that we have a few rooms available. We have a chat room, we have a room for questions, we have a room for polls. So how do we use them? The chat room is the, let's say, sit back and relax community room. Here you can discuss things, tell some stories, and foremost, you can make fun over there. It's more being among cybersecurity friends. The question room, that's probably the most important room. That's the room where you can ask serious questions. If you have any questions for the guest speaker, put your question over there, and afterwards it will be answered live or in the question room. Do not forget, if you ask your question in the chat room, your question will not be answered because there is too much communication in it, and it's just not possible to follow all the questions over there. The poll room is where we ask the questions to you because we need your feedback. So I want to motivate you to participate in those polls. And of course, if you want to tweet about this great event, please use the hashtag #CCBQCTR. So that's the short introduction for this afternoon. Let's go to the first guest on stage. I would say sit back, relax, and enjoy this webinar. For now, the first person that I want to invite on stage is Miguel de Bruycker. Miguel, can you join me, please? Miguel.
Hello, hello. Thank you very much, Pedro. Thank you for the nice introduction. So to be honest, I'm very proud that we can organize this event and that we have that many subscriptions. allow me to share my screen. And here we go. Normally, you should now be able to see my screen. So I am Miguel Deryckere. I'm the Managing Director for the Center of Cybersecurity Belgium. And just to explain a little bit in a few minutes, only in a few minutes, allow me to explain that we depend directly from the Prime Minister, and that our main task is to coordinate cybersecurity within Belgium. So we have different platforms. For instance, on the top left corner, we have the organizations of vital interest that we regroup in a platform that we manage. Then on the top right-hand side, we have all the law enforcement and state security agencies. And also this morning, for instance, we had a meeting with all of them. And then going further clockwise, we have the Cybersecurity Coalition. It's a public, private, and academic platform to exchange information and to organize a lot of events and information exchange. We also have an internet service provider think tank. And then, of course, we coordinate on national and on international level. The Center for Cybersecurity Belgium has 4 groups of clients, of constituents. First of all, we have the population that we try to inform and involve. For instance, we have created a mail address that is suspicious@safeonweb.be. We receive more or less 10,000 emails from the population a day. And this allows us to counter phishing attacks, to get statistics on phishing attacks, to respond and to build new projects on top of all that information that we get on a daily basis. We also have what we call at work, that is the businesses, the enterprises. And for instance, for them, we have developed different services and also, for instance, a cybersecurity reference guide. For government agencies, we try to also actively support them. And that's why, for instance, we have a penetration testing program to allow them to identify specific threats. We also have the organizations of vital interest as the 4th group. And for them, for instance, we have an early warning system, and we developed the quarterly cyber threat report. And this meeting, this presentation, originally came from those presentations to those groups, those organizations of vital interest for our country that are part of that early warning system. Allow me to go a little bit over some game-changing cyber attacks that we see for the last few months. I think we can talk about an industrialized cybercrime. We can talk about ransomware and phishing tsunami. And we see that actors get more and more powerful, old and new. Those for which we thought that they were gone, well, they pop up again. And in a completely different game, we will see in the presentations afterwards, it's a completely different modus operandi, and they have gotten even more powerful than we have seen before. And attacks get more and more sophisticated. I think we must be careful, because as our enterprises, our organizations are moving to the cloud, so are those threat actors, government and non-government. Also be careful about smartphones and IoT, and of course, supply chain attacks, as we have recently seen, where the big question is, who is really now the trusted partner, since there has been a lot of discussions on, can we trust specific partners in the supply chain? Now the question, of course, is it's not only about trusting that partner, it's also about being sure that that partner has not been hacked, of course. Allow me to make a little jump to something more high level. I think that we are at a point that we might think about changing a little bit the internet. I think that for the moment, we have something like a synthetic trust, I call it, or an artificial trust. We trust the internet, we trust the messages, the websites we visit, the applications we install, but there's no real trust. You're never sure. And on the other hand, we're going to zero trust environment. But there, the challenge is that the internet has been created to meet other people, to find other information, sources of entities and people that you don't know. So zero trust will be something difficult. And I think that bit by bit, we should evolve to something that is digital identity-based trust, where you have a lot of messages and information coming in from people that have a digital identity and from entities that don't have it, but it must be visible. You must be able to see, okay, this information is coming from someone with a digital identity, and this information isn't. And there shouldn't be by default a problem with the information that has been posted anonymously or without that digital identity, but at least you know that there was no digital identity behind. So we're open to all questions in the questions tab, and I thank you very much, and I pass the word again to Pedro. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Miguel, for this introduction. It's quite interesting. I just checked the question room. There are no questions about this presentation. I have the impression that everybody is already focusing on questions about SolarWinds, which is, I think, logic. So if there are no questions anymore, then I would like to thank you, Miguel. Thank you very much, and let's hope that Murphy stays asleep, that everything can go fine this afternoon. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, before I introduce you to the next guest speaker, I want to emphasize something. You may not forget that this event has a quite mixed public. We have people that are on C-level, we have network engineers, but we also have people who are digging very deep into technical details and cybersecurity issues. So it's quite a mix, and it's always a challenge for us to make an agenda that fits everybody's needs. So sometimes you will have presentations that are too technical for some people, and then some others will be too high level. But just sit back and relax and wait until we have the presentation that fits your needs. I'm saying this because the first presentation we now have, the next on stage, is a quite technical talk. Before I introduce, I want to introduce you to Dr. Joakim Kennedy. He's a security researcher at Qctr. I can already ask Joakim to join me on stage, please.
Hey, good afternoon.
Joakim, good afternoon and welcome.
Thank you.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm fine. Looking at the snow here in Belgium at the moment, so we have snowy weather. Joakim, you're bringing us a story about a zebra in Gopher's clothing.
Yes.
Already the title makes me curious.
Let me share my screen.
I'm not going to take too much of your time because you have a lot to tell. I would say give a short introduction about yourself, Joakim, and tell us all about what you have seen about Zebracy. Good luck.
Sure. Thank you. Thank everybody for attending. So what this presentation is going to cover is some activity that we uncovered towards the end of November, beginning of December, and it's some activity around a malware called Zebracy. But before we dig in on that, sort of just quick introduction about myself. So my name is Joakim Kennedy, and I am a security researcher at Qctr. And what we do is at Qctr is we trying to sort of solve security by using code similarity. So we have a massive database of good code and bad code, and we use this to produce sort of security solutions. And in addition to that, on my spare time, I am the creator and maintainer of the Go Reverse Engineering Toolkit, which is an open source toolkit for analyzing Go binaries. And if you're interested in it, you can find it on GitHub. So the agenda for today, we're going to go over sort of a little bit of an introduction to Zebracy, what the malware is and who has been using it. And then we're going to take a look at some 3 phishing campaigns that we've uncovered. And then we'll do a little bit of a look at the malware that uses version of Zebracy and some of the obfuscation techniques that they used, because they've sort of changed it a little bit. And then we'll look a little bit at a higher level, what are sort of the possible actions that can be taken away from this knowledge that's being shared today. So to start with, so Cybersecurity, so that it's a malware that has been known to be used by a allegedly Russian threat actor known as Sofisy. It also goes by other names. This threat actor is mainly focused on espionage. They have, in the last couple of years, have had a lot of interesting things have happened around them. It's one of the threat actors that was indicted a while back by the U.S. Department of Justice for the compromise of the DNC. So they've sort of been pretty active in this field. The malware Cybersecurity was dates back. The first use sort of dates back to about around like 2015. It sort of shared some of the overlapped code from previous tools used by Sofisy. And the way it operates is just as a downloader. It collects some information on the machine, send that up to the command and control server, and then expect sort of being delivered in a second stage to download and execute if it is sort of like the correct target. What's sort of unique or interesting with this malware family is that there are different versions that's been implemented in different languages. So you have samples that have been sort of found being written in Holvoet, C++, C#, Delphi, Go, Nim, and Virtual Basic, just to sort of name a few of these languages. The original version of Cybersecurity was written sort of in Delphi. Still see sort of that version around, or incarnation of it. And they seem to be sort of shifting around the use of them here and there. This has been an interesting tide that was released at the end of 2019. Kaspersky found some overlap between the use of the Cybersecurity's infrastructure and infrastructure that was used at the same time with a threat group that was going by the name of Gray Energy. Gray Energy is, according to ESET, that released the initial report on it, a sort of the rebirth of Black Energy, which is the threat group that was behind the power outage in Ukraine. It's also been allegedly behind the attacks on the Olympics in South Korea, and also NotPetya. So it's kind of an interesting sort of overlap between them. And this malware is mainly being used for targeting against government organization and commercial organization that is sort of engaged and focused on foreign affairs. The main sort of delivery method for it has been sort of via spear phishing. So this all started with essentially a phishing email that we uncovered, and it was actually sent to a user as part of the foreign foreign government affairs of Kazakhstan. And the email is relatively short. There's barely any sort of information, but what it does have attached is a VHD file. A VHD file is a virtual hard drive file. It's the sort of the default type of files that's used by Microsoft's Hyper-V for virtualization. And Windows 10 actually has built-in support for handling these kind of files. So if a user would have downloaded this file and sort of double-click on it, the file gets mounted as a hard drive, and kind of shows up as an external hard drive, external like USB drive that's been plugged into the machine. And what is sort of unique with, or kind of one reason why we think they might be using this is the files inside of this hard drive even though the hard drive is getting sort of downloaded from the internet, doesn't get flagged by Windows as coming from the internet. So applications doesn't initially get that warning pop-up of this application has been downloaded. Do you want to continue? So it's a kind of a bypass of that sort of mitigation. The file, the hard drive, contained sort of two files. First, we have sort of an application that is masquerading as a Word document. And this is actually the Delphi version of Zebracy. And then in addition to that, you have a PDF file that is sort of another layer. The PDF file is a document. It's fully in Russian. It is a list of persons and organizations that has been sort of associated or linked to terrorist organizations, according to, I think, Russia. Now, a few weeks later, if you take a look at the email header, we can actually see that this email was sent internally within the sort of the organization on the Microsoft Exchange. And it's also hijacking a already existing email thread, which is kind of making it obviously harder for sort of a user to kind of maybe detect that this might be a phishing. The interesting part is, some good information that we have here is that the Microsoft Exchange or Office 365 sort of will include the client IP that was connected to the web front end and sending the email. And by using passive DNS of this IP address, we can see that this is actually an IP that's originated from a VPN provider, which from a security perspective could be somewhat of a suspicious activity. Now, a few weeks later, so the first sort of the first email was sent in at around 21st of October. This is forward to about 11th of November. The same actual hard drive file was used again, and in this scenario, they have actually changed the application file. So instead of delivering the Delphi version, they've switched to the Go version. And then the PDF is actually a corrupt PDF. It appears as a file, but when you try to open it, it doesn't work. This is a technique we've seen them use before. I'm assuming it's to further sort of entice the user to actually click on the application. The one hypothesis of this sort of shift from why they kind of went from the Delphi version to the Go version, and then also with the shift of like the PDF, would be that maybe the first attempt wasn't successful, so they changed their tooling as they might have thought that it was actually being detected, and tried it again. A little bit about a week and a half later, another hard drive file was also found or used, and this one was actually uploaded from Azerbaijan instead of where the other ones had been targeting Kazakhstan. And in this scenario, we have actually the same use of the same version of Zebracy. The PDF here that they used is a slide deck of a presentation of a Chinese pharmaceutical company. At about this time frame, this company was one of the front runner for a COVID vaccine that was developed in China. They were in the phase 3 clinical trials, so it's a possibility that that's kind of the theme that they're riding on for targeting here. So the way we kind of attributed it or connecting it to Sophacy initially is by sort of analyzing it into in our system. We could see that this new version of malware that they used actually shared about almost 20% of unique sort of code snippets with previous samples that we've seen with Cybersecurity. And sort of drilling down even further by looking at the actual code blocks that overlap. So we have a pretty big sort of a code block of about 37 blocks of code. This falls in the actual code that is actually responsible for taking a screenshot. And another big sort of match that we have is the code that's responsible for producing and connecting, sort of set up the connection to the command and control server. We also have sort of overlap in the functions with regards to parsing the response from the command and control and executing it the second stage. So in terms of the overlap that we've seen from the code's perspective is part of the actual core functionality of the malware. We're sort of tying it sort of pretty strongly back to previous malware samples. Now, the two versions that was written in Go, they have slight sort of differences in mainly in what's in the obfuscation. The first sample that was used to target Kazakhstan, we can see that some of the function names have been mangled, where the second one that was used, there's a lot of sort of functions where you see func1, func2, and they're numbered. This kind of output suggests that they used an open source obfuscation tool called Qctr. So this version of the obfuscation is something that we used previously, and it's actually a relatively simple sort of obfuscation technique for the strings. It uses just sort of one function that does the obfuscation of the string. So here we see strings being sort of passed into this function, and the actual routine is actually very simple. It just goes through sort of each character. So we have sort of a loop here, and all it's doing is it's going to decrement the character and then just bring it together into a string that is returning. So the encryption they kind of use is more of like a Caesar cipher. So they have taken the string and, for example, taken the uppercase A characters in the string and just translated it to a uppercase B. So now when the malware runs, it just reverses that to actually get back the original string. The obfuscated tool that they used on the second sample operates in a different way. So the way the tool does, it replaces all of the strings that's been used in the binary for functions that at runtime regenerates the strings. So that's why you see in all of these anonymous functions that just been named with a number being created. This obfuscation is actually using a sort of a key that is unique per string, and then you have sort of like the encrypted data, and it just loops through each of these character and just XOR them together. So essentially each string has been encrypted with a one-time pad, which makes it pretty hard to sort of brute force it and sort of without actually getting the unique key that's used for each of the strings. Now, from the functionality perspective, the malware, when it runs, it sort of checks to see if it's being debugged. And if it is being debugged, it just enters sort of in a loop and doesn't do anything and just sits there. The other functionality that's been common all the way back to the original sort of version of Cybersecurity is that it takes a screenshot of the desktop. And then it's the other part where it sends that information up to the command and control and expects to download and execute sort of the next stage. Now, comparing it to previous versions of even like the Go version that they've used previously, there are some functionality that has been removed. So older versions used to get all the information using task list command. It also used to collect sort of system information. We had a system information command. And then the other part that's missing is that it doesn't collect the information via WMI about the local disk. Presumably, they've tried to make it a little bit more stealthy, as this can cause some noise in the system. And some sort of some takeaways from this sort of activity. So kind of what we could sort of gather from sort of like the email that we saw is that it's likely that the threat actor actually had credentials to a user account, so they've already compromised them to some extent, and they were using these credentials to pivot and try to get further into the entity. And also the use of sort of a hijacked and already existing email thread, which also makes it relatively hard. So maybe detect that it is as a phishing as it may be something that's already expected. The other sort of scenario we saw here is the accessing of the email via a VPN, which to some extent can seem, as a way of somewhat of a suspicious activity. So if you're in a scenario where you're trying to hunt for this kind of activity, these can be somewhat of the things to look out for, to see if there's been any sort of activity against sort of maybe credential stuffing, or has any of the user accounts been logged in from some known VPN endpoints. The other sort of scenario here is where they are using a VHD file as an attachment. It's a kind of a weird attachment, I'm guessing. It shouldn't be that common in terms of files that's being sent, given like they're relatively big for being an attachment. So these were about 11 to 12 megs in size, and obviously with email size limitation, it's not much. You can't go much bigger than that usually. And given that these are sort of files that's being used for virtual machines, they're usually much bigger. So there's some sort of give some ideas of what can be hunted for, to see if some similar sort of activity has been going on in your own environment. The other case here, what's interesting is the reduction of sort of the data collected from the machine that they compromised. So looking at it, it's possible that they're just trying to be more stealthy. And the way we've kind of found this is it's a lot of this kind of stuff actually can be found sort of using sort of Yara rules. There's things that actually, there's a lot of artifacts here that can be used for sort of the hunting. And also given with sort of the code overlap with previous samples that have been used, there's sort of, you can actually utilize the codes that's sort of overlapping and produce sort of code-based Yara rules, which is kind of something that we do constantly when we're finding sort of threats like this. Okay, so I just want to thank everybody for listening to the presentation. There's a link here to a blog post that we released in December around this that kind of goes a little bit more into like the phishing part. And then also, if you have any questions that you don't want to ask in this session, or want to reach out to us in terms of other sort of questions, feedback, you can reach us in the research team at research@Intezzer. We're always willing to sort of help out and share knowledge and information that we have, including sort of Yara rules that we usually don't want to share in the public, given that they have a potential to give away how we're actually tracking specific threats and things like that. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thank you very much, Joakim, for this interesting technical presentation. One of the things that I was already surprised of is when we look at our polls that we see that we have asked the public, have you ever heard of the ZebraC malware? And 72% never heard of ZebraC before. So I think that's already a first conclusion that your presentation is certainly an added value to the community. Thank you for that. I've seen also two interesting questions in the question room. I will start with the question from Michael McLean. The question is simple but clear. Do you recognize ZebraC only as a malware or also as a subgroup of SOFAC?
Well, the way we kind of are tracking it, we're just tracking essentially from malware perspectives. The attributions sort of back to which the group is. I know, for example, Kaspersky, who first did the disclosure about the group, tracks it as a subgroup of SOFAC. And from our point of view, we're not further interested in sort of further tracking it if it is a subgroup or if it's part of the SOFAC as a whole. For us, it's we're enough with sort of the part of it as just tracking the malware specifically.
Okay, and then a second interesting question is from Inias Himmerek. Do commercial EDR or IDS tools detect and quarantine ZebraC?
That's a good question. Since I'm not working in any of those fields, so I wouldn't really know. There's a variation in terms of like the detection, obviously on like VT with regards to when you're running it with scan engines, and what's obviously known is that the engines on VT does not usually run with all the full bells and whistles enabled, which it's more likely that you get a sort of a false negative than an actually detection because of that. So I actually don't have any good numbers to answer that. I'd say the way that we do the detection is we do it based on sort of the code similarity, and as long as we know threat actors do reuse code, and from our point of view, it's like if we can find small subset of code blocks that sort of link together, that's enough for us to detect it and reporting it that it's similar to what it's similar to in terms of it previously.
Okay, thank you for that. If anybody else wants to add a comment on that question, please do that in the chat room. Joakim, thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for preparing this presentation. First time that we work together, but I can say already it will certainly not be the last time. Thank you very much, and
thank you.
Stay safe. Thank you.
You too. Bye.
Okay, that was already a first very interesting talk. Next on the schedule is the cyber expert panel. I'm not going to say much about that because that's Kevin Holvoet's show. So I would give the opportunity to Kevin to explain to you what exactly is the cyber expert panel. Kevin, can you join me on stage, please? And I hope that Kevin has no technical issues. That would be a problem. Ah.
Work?
Hi, Kevin.
Okay.
You were still. I know you were still cleaning your room. It's always it's always like that before you go on stage. Kevin, just like I said, the Cyber Expert Panel, that's your show. So I'm not going to say much. I leave it up to you. Please introduce yourself, introduce your panel, tell the public what it's all about, and have fun. Talk to you in, like, say, 45 minutes. See you. Bye.
Of course. Thank you. Okay.
And apparently there is a technical issue anyway. Kevin, I don't know if you can hear me, but you were kicked out or kicked off stage.
I'm sorry here. I tried to share the screen and suddenly everything went blank. My screen completely crashed. So, some technical difficulties here, which will be fixed in a minute.
I will stay here for a few seconds just to be sure that we are not watching a.
Okay, let's see if that one works. Yeah, that seems to work now.
Okay, there I go. Bye.
Thank you. All right. So everyone, welcome to this webinar. Welcome to this expert panel discussion. For the next 40 minutes, we'll talk about a couple of topics, which I'll introduce a bit later. So I am Kevin Holvoet. I am a cyber threat intelligence analyst at the Center for Cybersecurity in the Citrus team. And I will be the moderator for this expert panel. You can reach me at DJ Hash here on the right on Twitter, and you can reach the CCB or CertBE on this handle. So let's welcome all our speakers, and let's invite them one by one. Stefan, please come on stage. Next up, we have Noor Fatin from Recorded Future. Then we have Dmitry Volkov from Group IB. Welcome, everyone. And last but not least, Moritz Lucas from Intel 471. Okay. So I see you're all here. You can all unmute yourself if you want. So welcome to this panel. Let's introduce yourself just quickly, just a 30-second introduction. We'll go from left to right. So Stefan, please introduce yourself.
Hello everyone, and thank you for the nice invitation here. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Pedro, for hosting this exceptional event. My name is Stefan Tănase. I'm a security researcher based in Bucharest, Romania. I'm working with the CSIS group on cybercrime research and also APT research. And a lot of what we do is responding to ransomware incidents. So I'm really happy to be on this panel to discuss this threat with you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Stefan. Next up is Noor Fatin from Recorded Future.
Thank you, Kevin. Pleasure to be here again. Hi, Pedro. I know you can hear me. So my name is Noor Fatin. I work in Recorded Future. I help lead up the technical solutions team in Europe. We have a long-standing relationship with CertBE, so it's a pleasure to be here again and talk through some of the topics that we have today to discuss.
Thanks, Noor. Next is Dmitry Volkov. Welcome, Dmitry.
Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me. I'm Dmitry Volkov, work at Group IB, responsible for Threat Intelligence Department, and also take position of Chief Technical Officer.
All right. Thank you for the introduction. And last one up is Moritz Lucas from Intel 471.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for inviting us. My name is Moritz Lucas. I'm Director of Intelligence Solutions at Intel 471. I'll start off with a confession. I'm actually standing in from the Bolt, who was supposed to be here. Unfortunately, he's not feeling very well. Nothing serious, don't worry. But he didn't feel up to this, so I'm standing in. Hope to adequately represent Mike, but my job at Intel Forces One is basically research and also presenting to potential customers and explaining to the whole world at large that basically we think doing cyber threat intelligence is a good thing as far as we're concerned.
I think it's indeed a good thing. We have to protect ourselves against everyone out there. Thanks everyone for your introduction. So now let's go to the expert panel. I'm not the expert here. We have 4 guys in the panel which will talk about the interesting topics today. But first, before we go do that, we had a couple of very interesting things in the last quarter, in Q4 of 2020. For example, if anyone remembers or recalls the Cito Day leak, it was a big credential leak which contained millions of records of many different people. But the thing here was that apparently that leak came from about 23,000 different websites that were breached. Now, the CCB informed about 200 organizations in Belgium about accounts, credentials that were in there, connected to the organization, and we already contacted about 250 other websites, pieces of websites that were breached, that were part of the breach in there. So that was what the CCB did in Q4 there. Now, there were also a lot of threat actors who sold or who just gave away a lot of information on exploits, credentials, malware infections that they used to sell the intrusion, sell the initial access in organizations. We saw one of the biggest supply chain attacks in cyber history, which we'll talk about later today. It will be the last 2 topics, the last 2 presentations of the day. We won't handle it here in the panel because there's enough to discuss in those presentations, and we have 2 other topics waiting for you. So we saw a lot of ransomware attacks. We saw an increase in Belgium. We saw, I think, a little bit of an increase all over the world in 2020. But most importantly, we saw that the sophistication and the way that they did things was changing a lot. And we'll probably see that change continue in 2021. On the other hand, second topic will be COVID-19. And it will be everything, what have we seen in 2020? What do we expect in 2021 for cyber threats related to COVID-19? All right, so first up, ransomware. I guess everybody already knows what ransomware is. We've been there since 2017 when WannaCry started, and even before for people who are longer in the sector, in the cybersecurity sector. But many things changed in 2020. We saw that they became increasingly aggressive in their approach. They started using double extortion. They started using many things in that double extortion. Now, who of our panel members is able to explain what we mean with double extortion and what kind of tactics have they used this year?
I think I can take that quickly. What we're basically witnessing right now is ransomware gangs being very creative in inventing new ways for them to essentially apply pressure on victims and to make the victims pay the ransom. In the very beginning of the ransomware era, to call it like that, as you mentioned, ransomware wasn't so sophisticated, and cyber criminals were often making mistakes in the way that they implement the encryption algorithms. And this was making it very possible, a lot of times, for the security research community to put out so-called decryptors, free tools like the ones that are put out by the companies participating in the No More Ransom project. And this was helping victims to recover the data. Right now, of course, the encryption algorithms that they're using are impossible to decrypt, and I'm talking about the mathematical possibility of decrypting it. And at the same time, what we're seeing is more focus and the attackers doing their homework before launching a ransomware attack. So they like to do lateral movement, and they like to make sure that they own the whole network when they start encrypting this data. So of course it's going up in both terms of sophistications, but also in how many groups are engaging in this activity. And I would say it's the biggest threat right now that we're facing.
Yeah, at least the biggest economical threat to organizations.
Yeah, Kevin, now, if I can add to that also,
of course.
You know, double extortion, meaning you are pressuring the victim from two angles, right? Number one is to get access back to their data and paying the ransom, but also failing to do so will cause the data to be published on an extortion site, for example. And you know, just to show you the growth of this kind of extortion technique, back at the end of 2019, there was only really one extortion site where Maze ransomware would publish or auction off the data that they got via the ransomware attack. We're now seeing at least 17 other ransomware groups doing the exact same thing. So from one pioneer group in late 2019 to almost any ransomware actor making their own extortion site. So that's definitely going to continue into next year. It's not going to decrease. I think we're going to see almost every ransomware operator and their grandmother have an extortion site that they can use.
I think we can. I think that's a fairly safe prediction, especially because actually what we're also seeing is that it's turning around. It's we've got at least one group that is admitted in an interview, because yes, ransomware as a service operators give interviews nowadays, where they said that actually for them the most important thing that they use to apply pressure is no longer the encryption itself. Too many of their victims are able to recover and it doesn't really scare them. No, for them the most important thing is that threat of exposing the data. So actually they're telling their affiliates, they're telling the groups that actually conduct the attacks that the exfiltration of data is absolutely critical, because actually that's the main pressure point they use to convince victims to pay up.
Yeah, so thanks, Maurice. Now, do you know, if you're talking about the ransomware as a service or RAS, do you know how exactly that works?
We have a fairly good idea. First off, is the ransomware as a service approach has become extremely popular, and that's for two reasons. One is, of course, because basically when you're conducting these attacks, you need to kind of divide up the work, and so specializing, having one team focusing on delivering the infrastructure for actually running the ransomware is beneficial. But the second reason that they do ransomware as a service is kind of it's like a branding exercise. If the ransomware or if the attack comes from a specific group of people, a specific ransomware, as a victim, you actually know their reputation. And you know the reputation twofold. One is the tooling will be sophisticated, so don't try and decrypt stuff because it's impossible. Other people have tried and have failed. But the more important one is they carry out, they will follow through on the various threats or promises that they make. It's threats and promises. Threats to expose your data or threats to not give you the key, but also the promise that if you pay them, they will actually uphold their promise. And the reason for that, obviously, is the ransomware as a service can be seen as some kind of brand. If they stick to their promises, future victims will be more likely to pay up. So for the current victims, that's actually somewhat comforting to know. How the model works, you have the ransomware as a service, the operators, they will basically have affiliates, people that they allow to use their infrastructure. If you're an affiliate, you get access to the infrastructure. Basically, this will allow you to obtain a binary that you then deploy on a victim network. Mostly after that, basically, so the affiliate can use that infrastructure. It's the affiliate's job to deliver victims. The affiliate finds networks that they gain access to, they map out the network, they move laterally, they do all the reconnaissance, and then exfiltrate the data, disable or poison backups, and then deploy the ransomware, which they get from the ransomware as a service setup. After that, in quite a number of cases, the actual negotiations are done by the ransomware as a service group. They will negotiate with the victim on the affiliate's behalf, and when a payment is made, the money is distributed. It's a anything from 60-40 to 80-20 split, with most of the money actually going to the affiliates. That is broadly how this model works. It is important, and I think for this discussion, it's important to remember that the ransomware is the very last step. There's a lot of activity that happens before that. So from the perspective of the defender, if you're only focusing on trying to stop the ransomware, you're probably too late. You need to catch them earlier in that cycle.
Yeah, I would like to just to add that there is no golden standard that how we can describe different threat actors and how it works in real time. Just because we can see, I would say, 3 different categories. The first one is the smallest, when the threat actor combines everything in one. So we develop ransomware, we develop other tools that we use to exploit vulnerabilities, to do lateral movement, to get full control over the network. So they just do everything themselves. So we don't need to hire additional people like affiliates and so on. Another category is completely different. So we have just a ransomware, we have probably DSL, data leakage site, and so on. And they need to hire someone who will enlarge their business activity and will, of course, infect as many companies as possible and then ask for ransom. And the third category, there is a very tight communication between different cyber criminal groups. One of them is responsible for ransomware part, and the second one is actually managing different other botnets. As you can see on the slide, there's Emotet, Trickbot, Buzzarload, Quackbot, and so on. And basically, most of these threat actors managed in the past and continue to manage different financial malware, like banking trojans. And now they just switch their focus from dealing with standard fraud to ransomware attacks. And in this case, where there's a really tight communication, they share code, they give a very detailed feedback, they have access to the source code of a ransomware, they can adopt it themselves and so on. So I would say the ransomware part became the real part of the, I would say, the standard banking malware gang, and they work as a single unity to increase the income that they need to get from different regions and, of course, different sectors of economy.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, as we can see, as we saw in all those stories, they really start to grow. They start to be corporations who just deliver services to each other, which is, well, actually kind of scary. We have 2 questions from the public. The first one is, do you think that law enforcement international collaboration is the only way to help the fight and to help the fight against ransomware threat actors? Yeah.
So that's an excellent question, Kevin. I can sort of tackle that first. So there's actually a really good example of what happened earlier last year, where Garmin were actually victims of a ransomware attack, and they ultimately, at least what's reported, is that they paid about 10 million in ransomware payment. Now, the U.S. had already sanctioned the group that was purported to be behind the attack, which is Evil Corp. So if you conduct a financial engagement with a sanctioned entity, that potentially puts you under threat of lawsuit because of a sanction violation. So my point to that is, yes, you've sanctioned the group, and you've in theory tried to prevent organizations from engaging with that group, but I very highly doubt that these ransomware operators care about sanction litigations. So they might be fully aware that you conducting a financial engagement with them is a breach of a sanction by international law, but quite frankly, I don't think they care about that. So it's a double-edged sword. Yes, you can get international cooperation, you can sanction these cyber groups, but it really comes down to whether they care if they're being sanctioned or not, and if those sanctions are being effectively felt by them. So I don't know what the panel thinks, but I just found that story quite interesting.
Well, I would say it's not very effective. I'm sorry for interrupting you.
No,
it's not. Yeah, thank you. So it's not very effective from a, I would say, full disruption of activity, but in fact, it have its own influence. For instance, if you take a look at what happens on underground forums, I mean, hacking forums where you communicate, we see that there is, I would say, very strict rules that you don't need to attack companies in Russia and sometimes in the United States. We still see that the United States is one of the main goals for any threat actors, but some of them afraid to do so just because people who do attacks against companies located in the United States, they usually became the subject of different investigations. So, and that's why at least some of them, I mean, early potential partners would not attack this type of organization. Probably we will choose someone else. Of course, it doesn't stop the activity of actors. This is what we see. But again, in some point, it works. And answering the question if it's the only way how law enforcement can stop these ransomware attacks, the answer is yes, just because we see that these cyber criminal groups became really big. I mean, big in terms of team members. Even if you just remove the head of threat actors, I would say the core of threat actor group, it doesn't solve the problem completely, because all these affiliates will just join some other ransomware affiliate program and will continue their work. So that's why you need to work on different angles. You need to fight with money laundering. You need to fight with affiliate programs, with people who actually manage the ransomware groups, and actually the people who provide them their platform for communication, like different hacking forums. So this is also quite important.
Yeah, and I would just like to add that if we're gonna need to find a solution to stop ransomware, we need to look at the root cause of ransomware. And I think the root cause of ransomware is not necessarily the lack of cooperation between law enforcement or the lack of legislation. Of course, there's a lot of things that can be improved there. But in my opinion, ransomware is, first of all, a technical problem, because it's technically possible for these threat actors to essentially compromise our organizations. So if we would be able to do security the right way and disable them for doing this, technically, I think we would solve this problem. But of course, I'm talking about an ideal world, and I don't think we live in the ideal world.
No, but I agree, and I think so. I think the solution would be a mix, as it always is. By the way, it's quite often in security it boils down to this mix. It's a mix of technological countermeasures to stop this, procedural kind of hardening the organization, and law enforcement to try and capture and or kind of erode the capabilities of the groups that are doing this. That's part of the problem, and totally agree with Stefan. In an ideal world, there'll be a silver bullet and there'll never be ransomware again. I don't think we'll quite get to that phase, but I do think we can make it a lot more difficult than it currently is.
Yeah, that's true. And I do think that, looking at these bots, these infections here on the right, looking at the tactics and the techniques that these guys are using to initially get into your environment, using the MITRE ATT&CK framework, for example, would already help a lot of organizations just closing it up, closing that hole, seeing where they come from, and trying to protect themselves. Maybe do some threat hunt, because we know that they are in the environment for weeks up to months sometimes before they actually initiate the ransomware execution. Okay, so we have another question. Are these extortion sites listed somewhere? Yes, they are. They are all over the world. I do think we can give you a link later on. We won't spell that link out now. Then there's another question, and I think that can just give you a yes or no answer if somebody knows it from the panel. I don't know about it. Sanctions can have a big impact, even more than 10 million. The OFAC, so OFAC, has not been reacting to Garmin, or have they? Does anybody know?
So the not as of yet. We haven't really seen an ongoing case there. I mean, if that's the answer to the question, there isn't an ongoing case yet, but it's a potential path that could cause more problems for the organization.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Thanks, Noor. So next up, this is an overview from Stefan's company about the exponential increase in activity related to data leaks. You can see that from June up to November, it increased a lot, and there's even a lot more actors going around. So I think this is a really interesting graph to see how it evolves and how it's getting bigger and bigger, this threat. So thank you.
Just to try to explain a little bit, because I think it ties to the previous question, which is if these sites are listed. And of course, all of these sites are publicly listed. This is open source information. They're usually hosted on Onion domains, so they're hidden inside the Tor network. But if you look them up, you can find them. And what we do at CSIS, since this hack and leak trend has started, is we're closely monitoring all of these leaks from the point of view of a supply chain vulnerability, because we have a lot of customers who are interested, first of all, to make sure that their own data isn't getting leaked there, but at the same time, they're interested in monitoring if maybe one of their suppliers has been hit by such a ransomware group, and then the supplier's data is going to be public, and that, of course, should be managed from a risk point of view. So this is why we're constantly monitoring it, and I guess the picture speaks it all. We've been witnessing an exponential increase, just like Noor said. In the beginning, it was just the Maze group, and now, almost 2 years later, is basically every ransomware group out there is running their own, mini WikiLeaks kind of website where they publish this data. And so basically, we're seeing this exponential increase both in the actual number of leaks, but also in the number of groups that are jumping on this trend.
Yeah, and one addition from my side, sorry. The CCB, so the Center of Cybersecurity, we within the Citrus team, we do monitor this on a day-by-day basis. And if we see any company that is in these leaks, we'll inform them and see what's up. I don't know, you had something else to say?
I did, yeah. I just wanted to say that this slide from Stefan is great because it emphasizes on the word leak. And this is really important because due to this double extortion technique, it means that any ransomware attack is a data breach as well. It's both. It's not just a ransomware attack. It's also a leak of your data and a potential data breach. So then people, in the audience might be asking, okay, well, what is an effective strategy moving forward given this information? And maybe the panel agrees, but a lot of it can come down to data protection. How is the data being stored within the network? Is it one massive data lake that if someone gets access to it, they have access to the entire lake? Or are we separating things out into separate mini caches and using, rule of least privilege, meaning people only have access to the data that they actually need to conduct their day-to-day operations? So I think the data protection needs to be taken into consideration moving forward, especially because now every ransomware attack is a breach in itself. I don't know what the guys think.
I think I think when you talk to victims and when you talk to potential victims, I think one of the things, I think you're right, Noor, in that regard, is you kind of have to start explaining to people that they need to change their mindset or change how they think about their data. Quite often you'll have people think about, well, who could possibly want this? Really, who could possibly want this data? No one's going to come in and hack in and take mine. It's not that special or that valuable. No, but the key question is it's special and it's valuable to you. And someone is going to come in, and effectively what they do is they take away your data and they charge you to get your data back. That's the key of ransomware. Or they'll say the data is it's not super secret, no, but you wouldn't want it out there for all your competitors to read or all your customers to read what you're charging each of them, for instance. And you go, ooh, that would be a bit unfortunate. And say, yes, someone is going to do that. And they will charge you a significant amount of money and say, pay me this, and that won't happen. And the odds of that happening are not zero. That's the thing about ransomware. So people often think that will never happen to me. Start thinking that, yes, that could happen to you. And once you make that switch, you suddenly start thinking, oh, maybe I should invest in a bit of this, or maybe we can change the way we store things or work around backup and become a little bit more resilient against these things. Really quick about the slide that showed, it really shows the increase, but that slide was looking at the data leaks. We can see the same increase earlier on in the chain about people, actors selling or trying to sell or monetize access in the underground. And one of the key bits of good news, I think, is that when you track that, we often see that there's a lot of time that elapses between an actor offering access to an organization for sale, and then suddenly there being a big thing in the news about so-and-so got hit with ransomware. So it's not like it's days. It's not like someone has an info stealer on a laptop, they steal a credential, they get access to the VPN, and 2 days later you're completely encrypted and you need to pay 10 million, say you're Garmin. That process can take months. It can take literally 2 to 3 months when someone pops up and says, I have access to for sale to a manufacturer of health tracking watches things. You go, who could that be? And then 3 months later, oh my God, Garmin's hit. So if you track these things, there's still time for you to stop them. And going back 2 slides previous to all this stuff, is one of the key lessons, I think, is don't ignore what people call the simple threats. Oh, info stealers are not really all that interesting. Yes, they are, because they can lead to big impacts down the line. You sometimes talk to people and say, well, this is not really sophisticated malware. No, it isn't. But people will take that information and turn it into something slightly more sinister, as it were.
Yep. Yeah, I would say there is an interesting thought about very simple malware, because one of the main vector how they actually get initial access to the network is a simple brute force attacks or exploit well-known vulnerabilities using publicly available exploits. So everyone knows about that, especially security experts inside of the big companies who became the victim of ransomware. But still, there's a huge opportunity for many different, very less skilled threat actors to gain access to this type of big companies.
Yep.
And the second point is how we actually do later movement and persistence in the corporate network. If you take a look, in most cases, we use the same tools. We use Metasploit, or in most cases, we use CobbleStack. So also very well-known tools. You probably also do penetration testing using these tools, but still you are still vulnerable to this type of activity. So that's why doing or planning your resistance strategy, how you need to protect a corporate network, probably the good thing is to test with well-known tools against well-known vulnerabilities. And if you fail here, then please fix it at the first stage, and then plan something more complex.
All right.
If you have a pen testing team, get their last report and check how well you were doing. Because if someone's going to hit you with ransomware, they will probably do exactly the same steps. So if your pen testing team couldn't get in, good news. If they were able to use Metasploit and Cobalt Strike for weeks on your network and no one saw a thing, you probably have some work to do.
Thank you, thank you. Now we'll have to go to the next part, to the COVID-19 part. Just to give you why the screen is constantly switching.
Kevin, one last comment from my side regarding ransomware, because I think it ties quite a lot into this slide regarding how to respond to incidents. And one of the trends that we're witnessing, and it's a very early trend right now, we've seen this with the dark side ransomware gang, for example, is they're also starting up affiliate networks for so-called recovery partners. They're essentially recruiting unwitting companies, but real IT companies, legit IT companies, and essentially giving them leads to contact their ransomware victims. So essentially these IT companies, they act as recovery agents on behalf of the ransomware gang. They can even offer the victims discounts in paying for the ransom if they work with the approved ransomware recovery partner. So I'm just trying to raise the alarm here, because I think we need to raise awareness that it's probably not a good idea to put fuel on this fire, and to essentially enable ransomware actors to outsource one more part of their business through an affiliate network. And I think these kind of companies who engage in this work are going to have problems with law enforcement. So just bringing about here.
Yeah, that's thanks for adding that information. It's indeed something we need to think about as a community going forward.
Yeah, basically the advice is, if you want to respond to a ransomware incident, you should be the one to contact the security company that's going to help you with the incident response. If the security company is the one who's contacting you, it's probably a good idea to say no.
Yeah, and as I say here on the crisis communication, just be prepared for everything. Have that contact already in place before you have an incident, so that it goes quickly and you know each other before you need to go into that recovery and that incident response procedure.
I wouldn't agree with Stefan about saying no, just because we see from intelligence perspective on very early stage that this company is already compromised. We try to notify the victim, but again, you will be very soon the victim of a ransomware, probably part of your data already leaked. You need incident response. And in this case, when we start, okay, I will find some other partner, let's take a the process of signing the contract is super slow, and that's why they just became the victim. So probably you need to estimate better if to say no.
No, but I agree that there's a real need to send these notifications. I just think the best way to do it is through organizations such as the CERT, for example, or the National Center for Cybersecurity, instead of just directly contacting the victims.
All right, thanks a lot. Now, if we go to the COVID-19 part, to the last part, and we only have about 5 minutes left, so we'll have to look at this quickly. Luckily, we have a very interesting presentation later on coming from IBM by Melissa Friedrich and Claire Zabova, and they will present us about the COVID-19 cold chain. Now, we've seen a lot of things happening regarding COVID-19 in 2020. It was the COVID-19 year. We saw a lot of credential harvesting. We saw a lot of initial access into networks through phishing, bank frauds, using teams like, hey, you can get back money from the government, all things like that. But we also saw a lot of very interesting and worrisome attacks against COVID-19 research centers and also the healthcare sector. There we also saw that ransomware again against hospitals, against vaccination, vaccination centers and stuff like that. But now in 2020, we are moving, and everybody in the world is moving to vaccinating the world population. So what do you think about this? Is there any certain threat that we need to keep track of? Anything that we should do as a community?
That is an incredibly broad question.
It's nothing that you wouldn't already be doing as part of your day-to-day vigilance. It's just magnified by 10 because there's a global pandemic thrown into the mix, which is like, throwing kerosene onto a fire. So, I was reading a really interesting report the other day where in the physical world, we had our physical pandemic. In the cyber world, we had a cyber pandemic. We had this huge amount of ransomware attacks, phishing, people claiming unemployment fraud so that they can get benefits from the government because they supposedly lost their jobs due to COVID, threats to election security. So everything that was already occurring is now magnified by about 10 due to the cyber pandemic also going on.
Yeah, I think we obviously, COVID-19 changed the way we work. Lots of people are working remotely. A lot of organizations have had to spin up remote access facilities quite quickly. A lot of organizations suddenly discovered that for some security things, they rely on where you are. So we can do things face-to-face. We can identify you face-to-face. Can you please come into the office? This now has to be done remotely. If someone suddenly has to spin up a bunch of remote access servers, maybe there's not enough time to harden them all or to get all the certifications on how do I actually properly set this up, just get it running, which opens the door for all kinds of cyber threats to be associated with that. There's a massive thirst by people for all kinds of information related to COVID-19. So you can use that as your lure to come in. You may have heard about the lovely example of someone who rebuilt John Hopkins world map as a jar, but you look at that thing and in the background it's dropping malware. Brian Krebs did a thing on it. It seemed to be a very simple actor that did it, but we saw some quite sophisticated actors that were actually gladly paying him to use that tool. Good news is cyber actors in the underground suffer just as much as we do. We've seen countless discussions where they go, oh crap, I've got COVID, or I'm worried about COVID, and then they'll sell each other miracle cures. So that at least is taking away some of the attention on us. They're too busy ripping each other off. we've seen actors that have gone offline for a bit. They came back and they said, I had COVID. I was in hospital. So that too affects them. And if you're looking at bank fraud, we've had some really interesting stuff around money muling, where basically, for instance, take Italy as an example. Earlier in the year, they had a pretty strict lockdown. And they had trouble with muling networks because quite a lot of their mules needed to go to an ATM to withdraw money. And you can't do that if the police are in the streets and will give you an instant fine. So, and also any credit card around skimming cards in hotels and shops and bars, for instance, and airports. Well, I mean, I can't remember the last time I was in a hotel, a bar, or an airport. So these groups have also had to kind of pivot. So that's just some of the things that we're seeing.
I think, Kevin, it's important to remember that the pandemic was a surprise to everyone: criminal, nation-state sponsored group, your family, your neighbors, everyone. So everyone's in the same boat here, right? So let's remember that. So including countries and governments who have no clue how to handle a situation like this. They weren't able to do so prior to the pandemic. They're still not able to do so right now. So a lot of countries have leaned on their cyber acumen to try and help themselves, get some answers to the common questions that they might be asking themselves. So it's no surprise that if you actually read the research of the Sino vaccine, which is the Chinese vaccine, and compare it to the traditional vaccine method that came out of AstraZeneca, for example, or some of the more traditional ones, not the Pfizer vaccine, there's a striking similarity between the two methods, the two vaccines. Now, I'm not going to be the one to spell it out, but there could be some espionage at play, because every country is trying to get an answer to this question. Every country is trying to solve the same problem while tripping up their neighbors at the same time. So we have to remember that this is all one big surprise to everyone. Everyone wants to get the answer to this problem, to this riddle.
And at the same time, we want to vaccinate about 7 billion people. We're going to get there in the end. The question is, who gets the vaccine? Who gets which vaccine when? And can we get a little bit ahead? And there's possibly lots and lots of very interesting questions that people, countries, etc., want answers to. What is another country exactly paying? Am I paying too much? Am I getting enough vaccines and stuff? So that's all the kind of stuff where kind of traditional espionage would be basically charged with finding me some answers to these questions, getting me the data. On the other hand, I would also imagine, maybe I have too much faith in humanity as a whole, but I would also imagine that actually doing something destructive against production or distribution of vaccines is something that a lot of actors would kind of back off and going, that's going too far, for two reasons. One, we may be a bit bad, but we're not that bad. But the other is, if you really, really want to have everybody come after you, you do something like that, and probably people are going to take an enormous interest. And you'll have very few friends left, I would imagine.
Yeah, thank you.
Kevin, do we have time for maybe a small point, or would you like to move on?
We are actually 2 minutes
okay, let's move
over time already. So it's a short panel this time, but we have to do with the time we have, of course. Thanks anyway for all the interesting answers and all the interesting discussions that were going on here. This is just a slide, as always, that gives you the most interesting vulnerabilities. Please patch these. We see that they are being exploited in the wild. And the next one here on the right, you have a couple of points. User awareness, use 2FA on all your accounts, do a periodic threat hunts, protect those entry points, protect that supply chain, make your backups, and increase that overall security posture. All these things will protect you, or would have protected you in 2020, but they will keep on protecting you in the future. They are the basics. Make sure they are done well, and you will be better than your your components. One last question before we go to break, and a very, very quick answer. This is something I asked to you before. Do you have any last tips or life lessons you want to share with the public?
I would share a quick thought in this context of the COVID-19 pandemic. Just want everyone to remember that there's many terms that we use in cybersecurity that are also used in the medical field. We analyze viruses, we analyze infection chains, we try to identify patient zero, and we try to quarantine the compromised machines. So I think what this pandemic showed us is how the earth essentially stops spinning when there's a virus out of control. And I think we should, in cybersecurity, it should be a lesson learned from us, because the same thing might happen in cybersecurity. So we should take it as serious as possible, just like we take our actual healthcare in serious terms.
I love that. That's a great point, Stefan. I think the world would be a better place if we all learned the lesson that cybersecurity deserves as much funding and attention as your marketing budget or the amount you spend on other things in the business. I think if everyone learns that one lesson from 2020, there's going to be significant improvement later down the line. And if cyber moves to the front of the agenda in everyone's mind, we're going to have a much better ride moving forward.
All right, thanks. Dimitri?
Well, my lesson, if you see an incident, you need to respond as fast as possible. Don't waste your time.
Yeah.
And the second point is, even if you were able to prevent the incident, don't think that you are still safe. The threat actor will continue to attack you, probably the next one. He will probably use the same way to attack you. So that's why do your homework better and fix previous bugs as fast as possible too. That's it.
So learn from the intrusions that were not successful. All right, thanks. And Moritz, last on.
I can hardly disagree with all the good advice being doled out here. I would like to add 2 points. I've been harping on. One is the ransomware is the final part in a large chain. It's almost like the MITRE attack. Remember, if you stop them early on, focus on that. That gives you more time to respond. That gives you more maneuvering space. And I don't want this to be a shameless plug, but I think in looking at it from a different direction, we were recently able to interview the CISO of a company that got hit by ransomware. And he actually was very open and forthright in an interview. It's up on our website, but and on what effect that had on the organization, what a major impact that gave, and what an enormous amount of effort it was to recover from this, and how they responded to that. I mean, if you look into that, that kind of helps you put into kind of sharp focus how much of an impact a ransomware incident has. So just in case you need to convince someone that it makes a little sense to invest some money to try and prevent these things happening, just look at what someone said about the consequences of when they do get in and when you do get hit.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Everyone, thank you for listening. I'm sorry to grab about 5 minutes of your time. Welcome Pedro here on stage. There is one more thing I want to say. The next Qctr event for the first quarter of 2021, we welcome you on the 22nd of April in 2021. So back to you, Pedro. Thanks again for all the speakers here on stage to join this panel, and maybe next time we can do it over a duvel or something. See you later.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Kevin. Very interesting and very active and very interactive discussion this time. So, but yeah, that's normal with such an expert in your panel. We're a little bit running over time, but we're going to fix that. That's not an issue. Just before we take a break, let's say I would bring a less happy message. Before we take a break, I would like to spend a short time to pay tribute to a key contributor in our community who passed after a courageous but unequal battle with cancer. His name is Jonathan Kleinsma. He was a superstar in threat intelligence, respected by his peers as a professional and appreciated as a friend. I would recommend you watch his keynote on supply chain attacks that he gave at the NCSC 1 conference back in 2019, and which you can find on YouTube. I will post the link in a second. Yeah. Jonathan issued his last tweet to the community on New Year's Eve, and a few days before he left us, and 21 days before his 30th birthday. I wish to offer our condolence to his family and his colleagues. Thank you. We see each other back normally. It was foreseen now to start with the second part, but I suggest that we take at least 5 minutes break. So let's say that we will be back for the next part of the quarterly event at 10 minutes to 3, so 2:50. That's in 6 minutes. See you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Pedro. Goodbye, everyone.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. This was a very short break. I think I never smoked a cigarette that fast in my life, but if you have to do it, you just have to do it. The map you saw on your screen during the break was an overview of all the different countries that that are attending this this webinar. So it's quite impressive how we are covering the whole world. And we move on to the next topic on the agenda. And the interesting topics, they keep on popping up here this afternoon. Next on stage, well, I think that last December, a lot of cybersecurity researchers fell off their chair when they heard about what happened with FireEye. FireEye became a victim of a sophisticated hack. The hack was almost immediately related to a supply chain attack on the SolarWinds Orion platform, and that was not just the beginning. Anyway, a good investigation starts with talking to the initial source, and in that case, it's FireEye Mandiant. And therefore, I thank our good old friend Ron Bushar, who accepted the invitation to be with us this afternoon and to tell us all about a highly elusive attacker. Ron, how are you?
Great. I'm excellent, Pedro. Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Should I jump right in or anything else?
I think that you have a lot to tell, so I won't take much of your time. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Apparently, I have an insect problem in my office. Okay, great. Thanks so much, and thanks everyone for taking the time today to listen to this briefing. I want to give you some background on what we were able to learn and discern from our own breach investigation, and then pivot to some analysis of what we've learned since December, since we first discovered this breach and made a public notification about the attacker that we're calling on 2452, their TTPs, some of their potential motivations and next steps from a defensive perspective. So Pedro, am I presenting the slides? Sorry, or are you putting those up for me?
It's easier, otherwise I can ask Kevin, who has a copy of your presentation.
Yeah, maybe that's better. I don't think I have it immediately in front of me.
Kevin, can you help us out here?
Yeah, give me a minute.
Actually, I can probably get it up pretty quickly here as well.
Yeah, if you can get it up yourself, that would be good.
Sorry about that. 1 second.
Yeah. No problem.
Checking here.
It's a live session, so
Yeah.
you know that sometimes there can be something wrong.
Yeah.
And this is what we call a small issue. If the internet would be down, that would be a big issue.
I hear you. Let's see. Uploading now.
The PDF is reacting strangely. Yep.
Well, I'll just start with preliminary. So I'm Ron Bushar, CTO for Global Government for Mandiant and FireEye. I've been closely involved with a number of government mission support areas for a number of years across the globe, including Belgian CERT and EU member nation CERTs. Specifically for this incident, I was part of the initial investigation and a lot of the coordination we performed with US and other national partners when we first learned of both the sophistication and potential impact of this attack group. So I'll skip over the boring biography for you. You know, on December 8th of 2020, as many of you are aware, we made a public announcement that we had been compromised with a nation state top tier offensive capability. The primary motivation for us to disclose this breach as fast as we did was the fact that we learned early on in the investigation that the attacker had accessed and downloaded a good portion of our red team tools. So we developed offensive cyber tools for the use of testing and exercise support and training for our customers to emulate adversary behavior, TTPs, to prepare them, frankly, for this type of attack. In some cases, those tools are direct or very similar versions or variants of what you would expect an adversary to use against you. So the capabilities in there, while not 0 days or anything that would be, we give the attacker the ability to exploit systems directly, it obviously was concerning to us, the fact that they had access to those, fairly a comprehensive toolkit at their disposal. So we took steps as fast as possible to both disclose the breach and then produce and provide detections and defenses against all the tools that were taken, so that our customers and everyone, frankly, in the world could defend themselves in case they were potentially used by the adversary in future attacks. So that that threat research in terms of what we had learned about the attack, as well as the information regarding our own red team tools, was published on December 8th. We've been updating those detections ever since. So if you go to our Git repo, which is referenced here, you'll see, I highly encourage you, if you have any interest in this, that there's been continuous updates to those detections in both our own IOC language as well as Yara, and other tool other languages for implementation, both host-based and network-based detection. So obviously, even post that announcement, we were still investigating our breach and really trying to determine first access. So we had a number of clues, a number of investigative leads that pointed us in the direction of a sophisticated threat actor that had the ability to access our infrastructure through legitimate VPN connections. And so we were trying to work backwards to understand how they'd compromised those credentials, those accounts, and how they frankly got into the environment to begin with. We had some early indications from our investigation related to our SolarWinds production environment. Specifically, we had some failed malware execution alerts from our own endpoint system or endpoint agent HX. It was our machine learning algorithm that had caught an attempted execution of what we now know to be a modified beacon variant. And it was partially executed, but not fully executed. But we couldn't understand how that variant had gotten onto the server. And there was no indications in our logging or any of our other telemetry of how the attacker had gotten onto those systems. So we began to investigate in more detail, specifically on our SolarWinds servers. Again, the traditional kind of analysis we performed there, memory analysis, registry analysis, file analysis, didn't really uncover anything, didn't give us any leads. So our malware analysts and reverse engineering team took the fairly unprecedented step of deciding that they were just going to analyze and reverse engineer every single file and binary on that system. So we're talking about obviously tens of thousands of files, hundreds of gigs of data, but we felt we had to uncover every possible rock in this investigation to try to understand what had occurred. When we did that, we finally came across a very small piece of code embedded inside of a DLL, which was as part of a much larger update package in the SolarWinds Orion hotfix update, which we now know to be the supply chain breach that had occurred at SolarWinds. When we first discovered that that evidence, we had to do two things really quickly. One, we had to write some additional detections specifically for the malware that we had discovered, which we're calling Sunburst. And two, we had to determine, how did it get there, right? Was it put there by the attacker specifically in our environment somehow, or was it in fact, provided by a vendor in signed code? We had some early indications that pointed to this was a supply chain signed code issue, but we wanted to be sure. So we did some additional checking. We downloaded additional copies of the hotfix and update packages from SolarWinds. And in fact, we did find the exact same file tool marks and indicators in those newly downloaded packages. Again, as most of you are probably aware at this point, that signed package, it was signed by SolarWinds using a semantic certificate dated March 26th or 24th of 2020, which kind of gave us a earliest potential, at least at the time, our understanding, earliest potential, access, not in our environment, but earliest potential access, using this technique by the adversary. When we became certain that it was a supply chain attack, we took additional steps to notify our law enforcement partners. I neglected to mention earlier, and upon understanding of our own breach, we involved FBI from a criminal investigative perspective. And we also began notifying a number of our national partners as to the risks, again, related specifically to the red team tools. When we found this additional issue with SolarWinds, we again notified FBI. We notified SolarWinds as a responsible disclosure. And then we began to implement our detections for this particular piece of malware. And we immediately had an understanding that this was a much wider issue than just us. So we began to see dozens of our own customers who were potentially victimized by this distribution, basically around the world, every country or every region, every vertical that you can think of, which makes sense now that we understand the mechanism for the insertion. Our working assumption is that the adversary didn't really have the ability to target the distribution of this backdoor. They simply had to insert it into an update supply chain process and then work, on the back end as those packages were downloaded to determine which victims they were most interested in. So when we started to see that wider impact to our customers, we of course had to start notifying our own clients. And then we knew we had a much bigger global issue. So we took the step of making a public announcement on December 13th as to what we had discovered. We were, again, working closely with national authorities, DHS, FBI, others globally, including European entities, to give them a kind of a heads up of what we were seeing and what the impacts were going to be. But this happened very quickly. Frankly, it's not normally the way you'd want to do a disclosure announcement, but because, again, of the severity and the potential impacts, we felt we had to move very quickly to make this awareness more public. So we started tracking this group as UNC2452, as I mentioned. That's a cluster of activity related specifically to the SolarWinds backdoor, along with some associated techniques and capabilities, which I'll describe shortly here. Again, just from a perspective of scope, I think many of you are probably aware, SolarWinds has publicly stated that they believe somewhere south of or less than 18,000 of their total Orion customers had downloaded an impacted package. We're now aware of 4 or 5 variants that were inserted as part of this attack chain throughout the early parts of 2020. From our perspective, what we could see, March, April, and May, at least, variants that were potentially impacted. We have evidence from other reporting that you may have read that indicates that testing of this insertion technique may have begun back in late 2019, August to October timeframe. We know that the C2 infrastructure, the avsvmcloud.com domain registration, was switched and seemed to be operationalized in the October-November timeframe of 2019. So we know they were getting the C2 component up and running at that point as well. So you can kind of see the baseline preparation happening prior to the distribution. And then, from our longer term analysis, I'll get into some impact analysis of what we think the intent of this entire campaign might have been. But at this stage, again, 18,000 total victims based on the sophistication of specifically what we call second stage access mechanisms. So that's beyond the initial DNS call out and registration of the victim environment to the attacker. In every case we're aware of, if the attacker is interested in further accessing the environment, they stand up very customized C2 infrastructure that is separate from that AVSVM cloud infrastructure, which means, from our perspective, it's really not feasible that they would have tried to access 18,000 victims. They were very targeted, very disciplined in their interest here. It does feel and read much like a large-scale espionage operation. And at this stage, both us and some of our partners feel that the total victims beyond the initial download and activation are likely to be in a much smaller number. We're only aware of less than 20 at this point from our own perspective. In terms of the overall downloading, and again, I think this is just this is really more of a, I'm sorry, beyond the initial downloading, our awareness of the targeting beyond for what we call first stage. You can see kind of the distribution here, but it has a clear delineation to both IT, additional supply chain providers, as well as telecoms, government and government adjacent organizations, NGOs, think tanks, and government contracting organizations. So from our perspective, again, the targeting and the intent is fairly clear. Really two primary motivations: maybe potentially continued supply chain insertions or compromise in the future, as well as perhaps some understanding, as with our case, we believe, a little bit of reconnaissance of what potentially cybersecurity organizations were tracking against this particular attack group, or potentially they're sponsoring organizations more globally, or more large, more wide aperture, what we knew about their activities around the world. And then obviously the primary target from our perspective was government data, government information. What we see in terms of TTPs beyond initial access, it's persistence, number one. So again, we see a common technique that they quickly move off of the SolarWinds infrastructure, we believe, to preserve the clandestine access mechanism, and then establish secondary C2 that is based on usually first using some sort of beacon or Cobalt Strike variant. Interesting, component there is that they seem to use common malware that doesn't really provide direct attribution, but they wrap it or they package it in a way that makes it hard to detect, at least upon initial execution. And that's what we saw in our environment. That's the component of our attack that we noticed as the kind of the initial indicator for us to pivot off of. But there seems to be an intent to move away from the SolarWinds compromise as fast as possible. In our case, once we reviewed all of our log data and telemetry, we determined that the attacker, once they had gotten secondary access in the environment, did not use the SolarWinds mechanism at all for the remainder of the attack chain. So they move away from it. They don't touch it. It seems that they maintain it as, again, a clandestine access. But from the second stage, beyond persistence, to us, it appears that they target internal documents, email, intellectual property. In our case, obviously, our red team tools. And they also focus initially on security, internal security members and administrators. Again, we believe in an effort to avoid detection. So the overall, the overall profile of this group is obviously highly sophisticated, just from a capabilities perspective, but also highly aware of countermeasures, right? They seem to understand the entire kind of detection lifecycle of a traditional net defender, cyber defense operations model, and they take steps in every phase to avoid it where they can. Interestingly, again, the disciplined nature of this attack group, from our perspective, while they seem to have really unfettered access across a large portion of most victim environments, they don't tend to randomly access data. They don't touch workstations directly. They only tend to focus on enterprise systems and data repositories. They don't go after what would otherwise be considered valuable information, PII, financial information, other sorts of internal information. They don't tend to download entire inboxes, for example, either. They're very selective in their searches in the environment, and they are disciplined about only taking data that relate to those search terms and those information that they're most interested in. Again, this to me speaks of a desire to remain hidden, number one, but also a highly targeted campaign with very specific goals in mind. No indication of destructive or disruptive goals either. No deployment of any sort of tooling that would indicate, and no real activity either that would indicate destruction of either log files or other types of data in the environment. So again, when you look at some of their techniques in some of their clandestine access mechanisms, very, very sophisticated from the perspective of C2. No common infrastructure that we can tell in any of the victim environments beyond that first stage call out that I talked about earlier. The C2 that they do build is highly customized to each victim environment. It's within the same country and geography as the victim. It's built to not only emulate the victim's corporate environment or enterprise environment from a just from an operating system and configuration perspective, but even down to NetBIOS and hostname conventions. So as they start to leverage legitimate remote access mechanisms, the systems that are accessing that they've stood up are not going to stand out in any sort of audit or alerting. They are very careful about execution of additional malware. So they have a low malware footprint in general beyond that first stage, obviously SolarWinds, plus some very small use of those other C2 mechanisms as initial command and control. In our case, the only two pieces of malware we ever recovered were that teardrop, which is that beacon variant I talked about, and the SolarWinds component. Everything from there relies on legitimate compromise of legitimate Active Directory or other credentials in the environment. We're aware of some other tools that may be associated but not directly linked to this attack. But again, in general, not a lot of deployment of discrete tools in the environment. When they do move laterally and they do need things like privilege escalation, they are careful to temporarily replace files on systems, execute a Trojanized variant, and then replace that Trojanized variant back with a legitimate binary, for example. They do the same thing with task modifications. So again, not destroying log data or destroying information that may actually in itself trigger an alert, but just using the ability to hide their activities after they've accomplished their goal on a particular environment or a particular system. Again, a high awareness from our perspective of the ability or what defenders typically look for, and also what they typically whitelist or ignore, on a daily basis from a detection and response perspective. I don't want to get into too many details. I think that we're going to have another speaker here that may touch on more details around the component around the initial call out aspect, but it is very sophisticated. It's very sophisticated logic they put in here, both to avoid any sort of sandbox detection, as well as to maintain, again, that stealthy access. So a number of mechanisms to sleep for a long period of time before first execution, additional logic that will also put the malware to sleep if it detects certain environmental variables that would indicate either they're running in a sandbox environment or potentially being monitored by anti-malware tools. And a number of kill switch capabilities that, based on returns from DNS lookups, would also permanently kill the malware if it returned the wrong information back. So again, an enormous amount of effort on first stage here to assure or do as much as possible to assure that they would not be detected upon execution. We do see some evidence of password spraying attacks once inside the environment to gain additional access to legitimate credentials. I want to point out we have not seen with this UNC group any creation of accounts. It's only compromise of existing accounts. So they're, again, very careful not to draw attention to creation of new accounts in the environment. But in our case, we actually saw no failed logins anywhere. So they were very, very good about only using accounts and credentials when they knew they would work, and only in the right places where they were applicable to the data they were going after. There's additional vectors that are now being reported by DHS, CISA, in terms of first stage access beyond the SolarWinds component. You might have heard some reporting. This came out recently around potentially Mimecast, Mimecast certificates as a potential vector as well. So early stages there. I don't have a lot of details, but again, our interpretation of this attack group's methodology is that they are likely to either be attempting or have compromised other supply chain mechanisms or other mechanisms for first stage access beyond the Sunburst component or the SolarWinds component that we are aware of. As I mentioned, we did also see in some victim environments Mimikatz, in addition to that customized beacon teardrop variant that we talked about earlier. But again, as I said, a high focus on using tools that would not provide any really distinctive attribution to any known threat group. On the lateral movement side, seen a lot of activity around SAML attacks. So the golden ticket kind of attack methodology focused heavily on AD and ADFS servers in the environment, stealing the encrypted token signing certificate and then minting legitimate tokens that allow access both to on-prem federated systems that are authenticated that way, as well as cloud environments. And so this is again another stealthy mechanism for them to maintain not only persistence but data access in a way that allows them to get access to things like email, other data repositories in SharePoint, etc., without actually having to use user credentials. They can use federated service account credentials that have read access into those data repositories. And again, those are typically accounts that aren't as closely monitored as, say, administrator accounts or user accounts in those environments. So they tend to fly under the radar from a detection perspective by using those SAML tokens with service account or account mechanisms within those environments. There's a number of detections that we're preparing to provide in a public document in terms of both hardening and detection of some of these additional Microsoft lateral movement capabilities, but CISA and a few other organizations also have some good guidelines, as well as Microsoft, to drive detection and hardening of some of these mechanisms. We did see some PowerShell configuration and federated services mechanisms in play as well. And you have to look at very carefully, if they do get to this second stage mechanism, your tenant environments, as well as I said, federated domains and trusted domain architectures. We have seen evidence that they've created new trusted domains to access and hide within as well. But again, the mechanisms beyond, once they've gotten to this level, essentially it becomes a very persistent data collection attack lifecycle. So in other words, we see consistent periodic check-ins and diffs of downloads of whatever data repos they're interested in, usually on a daily or every other day type of basis. So, and even in our case, they also seem to be perhaps confident in their mechanisms, or maybe not really that concerned about attribution, because in our case and in other victim environments, we have noticed that even when we start to take remediation action, that should be fairly obvious to them that we've caught them to some extent, or at least we are aware of their activity. They continue access. They continue attempts to access data. They continue access attempts into the environment. They don't seem to really stop their activities at all, even during remediation, which to me, again, it speaks to a little bit of either a calculation that if they've been caught, they're going to try to get as much data as they can before they're fully kicked out of the environment, or they have high confidence in other access mechanisms that they feel won't get detected, or they're not concerned about attribution, or all three. So again, Azure AD as well, pivoting from the on-prem ADFS to Azure AD is another mechanism that we've seen at play here. And there's some more technical details that will be available. As I said, on the Azure AD applications, those privileged federated applications that have the ability to read email or other sorts of repositories are major areas of focus and use. We believe, again, for the purposes of, I don't know what's going on with the slides there, sorry, for the purposes of maintaining really stealthy data access, because you don't have to necessarily access as users, which may trip up things like geofeasibility alerts or other sort of concurrent access alerts when you have the same user logging in or accessing their inbox from various IP ranges. And we do see that. So again, these guys are very good about using that geography and local C2, but they don't create new accounts, as I said. So they are taking some risk in accessing accounts when they need to, and potentially stepping over legitimate user access at the same time. On the exfil side, there's really nothing sophisticated about their exfiltration. They essentially just use the same mechanisms that are legitimately authorized in the environment. In our case, for the Git repos that held our red team tools, they compromised those Git accounts and they downloaded, they just did Git on those repos that they were interested in. Simple as that. They're not staging anything that we can tell in the environment. They're not packaging up and zipping files or anything like that. They're essentially just using legitimate user access mechanisms to download the data that they're interested in. The one exception to that is that we have seen indications of them downloading a good portion of the AD server itself and all the files associated. So that is a fairly large download mechanism. But the bulk data, again, there doesn't seem to be staged in any sophisticated way. It's just a straight either PowerShell or scripted download of files off the system. We have seen other mechanisms beyond SAML and ADFS to also compromise Duo certificates, or Duo, or not just Duo, but other sorts of multi-factor. Those mechanisms include legitimate registration, again, as a user of additional two-factor tokens in the environment, as well as stealing Duo secret keys, as reported by Velexity, as another mechanism. So they have, I wouldn't call them necessarily MFA bypass, but they are just essentially, again, acting as legitimate users in the environment and creating the two-factor mechanisms that they need to continue their access mechanisms. One other interesting point I forgot to add here, on multi-factor, in our case and in others, they seem to be able to have a good, fairly sophisticated capability to spoof mobile devices to register those two-factor tokens. We, for a variety of reasons, we don't believe that the devices registered are actually real physical devices, but they are able to at least simulate them enough to the extent to download and use those multi-factor tokens. So an interesting technique there from a mobile device perspective. On attribution, this is hard. And there's been various public statements by U.S. government agencies as well as other private sector organizations. We're not prepared to make any specific attribution at this point. What we can say, again, the four primary points of this group: low malware footprint, high priority on stealth and maintaining stealthy access, a high understanding and capability around operational security, not giving away anything that would actually lead to strong attribution, and they're highly targeted and resourced. As I said earlier, even though they were able, when you look at the totality of the SolarWinds downloading, when you look at the sophistication of the C2, they stand up for the second stage targets that they're interested in. It takes a lot of resources. They maintain, again, a very sophisticated infrastructure, again, created very close to the access, so not staged ahead of time, not really giving defenders any information ahead of time. Seems to us to be very manual in nature, to be able to build those customized infrastructures and use them. So the ability to do that obviously takes a lot of resources, but I don't believe that could possibly, maintain that sort of access across hundreds or thousands of victims at the same time. Again, that the registration mechanism, which I didn't want to get into too many details on, but DGA components there are actually a really interesting way to funnel down the hosts or the victim environments that they're most interested in quickly. They have some interesting encrypted data within the DNS lookup information that allows them to essentially decrypt the victim environment, at least NetBIOS and Active Directory domain information, and give them some indication of where they landed with each of these backdoors. So that allows them, in our opinion, to quickly filter the target set that they're most interested in for second stage access. Again, they tend to have either developed quickly or maybe through other mechanisms a fairly detailed knowledge and understanding of the corporate environment or the IT environment that they land in. And they seem to know to a very fine level exactly how security operations centers, cyber defense operators would typically discover breaches, and what mechanisms are usually whitelisted or filtered out of detections, from a monitoring perspective because they're too noisy, and they use those exact mechanisms to hide in the noise. All of this to us obviously speaks to nation state capability. It speaks to a patience in their execution that to me reads that this was designed to be a multi-year clandestine access campaign. I don't believe that they're, if you look at the timelines involved, I think a combination of luck and maybe some mistakes operationally in their targeting and some of their attack methods with us specifically kind of blew their cover earlier than they would have probably liked to have seen. I mean, I read this as the investment made here and the patience was designed to keep this access for many, many years if possible without being discovered. And again, from what we can see from the targeting of the data sets, the information that was taken, the only real logical use for that information would be a nation state actor. On the motivation side, again, it seems to us to be espionage nexus. I think I've actually kind of covered all these, and the wide collection mandate here to us speaks to targeting and collection across both government agencies and missions, adjacent government support entities such as NGOs and vendors or providers to government agencies, those types, and then again the information infrastructure that potentially would be additional access mechanisms for them to maintain this sort of campaign over time. So we can't, again, we're not prepared to make an attribution to any country or specific group. U.S. government intelligence agencies have stated publicly likely Russian in origin. I think that makes sense. That's plausible from all the evidence we have. But we don't have any other linkages to other known state-sponsored groups that would make sense given all the descriptors we've provided here. But we're still ongoing. It's still an ongoing criminal investigation with law enforcement as well. And there's there's a lot more to be learned as we start to unravel some of the command and control and some other elements of this campaign over time. Last, I'll leave. I forgot to mention at the beginning stages, this group, based on what we know now, it seems highly unlikely to me that they would really want to or need to use any of the red team tools they took from us. I think that was more of if I had to provide a motivation for that, it seems to be more of trying to understand what types of tools and malware we had potentially collected in our own investigations and put back into our own red team tools, more so than an actual use of those tools. We have not detected, either us or any of our partners, we have not detected the use of any of our red team tools in the wild against any victims to date. And I don't believe, or I don't anticipate that we will see that anytime soon. This also doesn't seem to me to be a group that would, sell or transfer those tools to other groups for use either. So, but we're going to continue to monitor that situation, and we'll obviously make notifications if we do detect any malicious use of those tools around the world. So just leave you with the last couple thoughts. The vast majority, from what we can tell today, of the SolarWinds original backdoor victims did not receive a second stage interest or access. But especially if you fall in that nexus of entities that would be potentially interesting to this organization or this attack group, it's very highly imperative that you perform a very thorough investigation, not only of the SolarWinds systems, but of the adjacent environment and specifically your Active Directory infrastructure to confirm and validate that there was no additional access in the environment. Because if they've gotten to that stage, again, the persistence and the stealthiness makes it extremely difficult to really understand the full access without a really deep dive investigation across the environment. Access logging. So in addition, again, these guys were able to bypass basically every known detection mechanism out there for the most part, tooling. So a lot of the value we found in our investigations to date have been access logs, other sorts of logs, both in Active Directory, Microsoft logging, et cetera, to try to understand invalid or sorry, the attack access versus legitimate access. It's a lot of manual work to kind of look through those data sets to determine compromise and access if you're at that stage. Obviously, take this very seriously, and I think all of you are, from the perspective of if you're part of that target profile in your investigative steps. With there, I'll stop there. We have some resources, on our, as I said, on our blog and website. We have continuous updates for detections for our own red team tools, for detections of what we know about the SolarWinds components, both on GitHub repos for you to download. So those are updated on a continuous basis. We also, as I said, shortly have a remediation guide that will have all the steps around detection, containment, eradication, hardening of each of these phases. We hope to have that out publicly today or tomorrow, so keep an eye out for that. Microsoft has a number of their own recommendations, again, very useful from a perspective of any of the cloud environments or on-prem Active Directory components, both for detection and hardening. DHS obviously has been putting out a number of tools and information from a government perspective, which I think are very useful. We've been working closely with them to develop a lot of those recommendations. And then NCSC as well has a number of recommendations and support functions that you can reference in this attack. I'll point you to, for a local point of contact, we have our government security program manager, Paul Tumulty, who's local to Europe for you if there's any follow-up questions, or you can always reach out to me directly as well. So I will leave it there and open it up to questions. I don't see any in the question side. Pedro, maybe anything that you...
Okay, thank you, Ron, for this very, very, very interesting presentation. We are not surprised, but we have quite some questions in the question channel. I don't know. Do you have access to that question channel, Ron?
I mean, so I do. I think, but I apologize. Oh, maybe. Okay, hold on. Let me see. So I'll start at the top. Could 2452 not have been avoided altogether if the company simply provided MD5 or like hashes of all the files? Oh, yeah, no, the hashing. So in terms of the compromise, again, they were, from what we were learning now and some of the reporting that's coming out, they were able to insert the code before the signing and checking phase of the software distribution. So no sort of hashing would have provided any sort of detection mechanism here, unfortunately. This is a highly, it seems to be a highly sophisticated mechanism to insert. Again, it's a very small piece of code inside that DLL. There's like 40,000, 50,000 lines of code inside of that one DLL. The total execution code that was embedded in there, which was also cleverly obfuscated, was only like 20 to 30 lines. So very tiny needle inside of a very large haystack to try to find. How likely is it that FireEye targeted in an attempt to find more supply chain vectors? It's a good question. So we have no evidence in our case that the attacker even attempted to, and we have no evidence that they were able to compromise any of our production system software, tooling, or customer-facing infrastructure. They didn't actually even seem interested in it, to be honest with you. So I don't believe we were part of that supply chain component that I was talking about earlier. I think in our case, the most likely explanation is we investigate this group, other groups like them, adjacent groups, let's say, from a country perspective around the world. And we've been very active in responding and kicking them out of environments. My strong assumption is that they were really, because they had the access, because we had SolarWinds, they wanted to understand what we knew about them, what steps were we taking to investigate them, and potentially, perhaps, did we already have a detection for this backdoor, and were we tracking them that way? That's my assumption of why they looked at our tooling the way they did, and specifically looked at people and people in the company that were actively investigating breaches that related to what we assumed to be adjacent threat groups. Do you think common ETW-based detection mechanisms would be useful against these classes of attacks? I don't, unfortunately. The only thing that really triggered from an active detection perspective in our environment was machine learning, tooling on endpoints that detected some some, again, unusual behavior, but nothing specific to the sunburst component at all. So I just, the challenge we have here is the breaking of a trust chain in such a way that it makes it, if you want to validate the execution of every piece of software that's used in your environment, becomes extremely painful, and it's not a trivial matter at all. For the attribution, anything was new after publication from Kaspersky asking to review some known previous artifacts, the ones linked to SolarWinds news. So obviously, I think you have to take some what's the right word? There has to be some caveats to public reporting. We try to maintain factual basis based on what we can see and observe and collect direct evidence on. I think Kaspersky does have some interesting connection points potentially to other associated clusters of activity. I think the solar leak thing, we're looking at that, others as well. I think, frankly, it's not credible from what I can tell. This, again, based on the way this actor worked, I don't see them selling that data to anybody or providing it to anyone else for monetization. It just seems, frankly, amateur in the way that it's being proposed out in the public space for sale. So it seems like an attempt to monetize a fairly public breach, in my opinion. How do we detect the initial implant? As I said, it was our ML algorithm on our HX software that initially stopped the execution of that beacon variant, which pointed us in the direction of SolarWinds, but didn't, it didn't allow us that initial, hey, we know everything, right? We had to go much, much further than that. All right, solar leaks I commented on.
Maybe one last question, maybe, Ron, before we close.
Right. So this is the challenge that Daniel asked the question. Why did we? He says it seems nuts that we actually reversed every file on the SolarWinds server, and it is. And this is, look, the fact of the matter is, now that we and others knew what to look for, you can go back in time and actually go to previous breaches, right, in customers' environments and figure out that the SolarWinds was the vector. In those cases that we were involved in and others were involved in, no determination was ever made of the initial access. It was basically closed as we couldn't figure it out. And this is the reason, because you would not normally undertake such an effort on systems like this to reverse those files to that level to try to, prove an assumption that, frankly, it seems fairly low probability, right? The only reason we did it, two reasons. One, we got a lot of smart people who were really mad that they couldn't figure this out. And two, we just, we really felt that it's our money, essentially. We're spending the time and effort to figure this out. We normally, would not recommend that for any standard customer out in the world. So I think it's very clever from the attacker's perspective to compromise something that, again, would normally just be set aside as that it can't be that's legitimate software on the system. And that's really the problem with this entire attack methodology, is it sets the bar so high for defenders to try to validate, everything that's running in their environment. It's almost impossible. All right, so Pedro, I think time's up. I'll pause there.
Okay, thank you very much, Ron. Unfortunately, we cannot answer all the questions. If you still have the time after this presentation, maybe you can answer them by writing. Anyway, Ron, I don't know how to thank you for this very interesting presentation. I can assure you, when you come to Belgium, that we will arrange this. Good luck with the further research and investigation. Always looking forward to read more about it. And I would say great job. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye everyone.
Okay. Time goes fast when you're listening to interesting stuff. So that was FireEye. We have still one very interesting topic on the agenda, the last one for today. And I think that people are already suffering a little bit about all the information that they are getting this afternoon, but that's just the goal of the CCB webinar. Next on stage, may I ask Costin on stage with, I think the name is Yuri or something, the younger guy. Costin, can you join me, please? Yes.
It's Georgi, actually.
Ah, Gorgey.
Yeah.
Okay. And now we are waiting for your master, for Mr. Costin.
Yeah.
I think there's the reason why Costin asked last minute to add you to the presentation. I suppose he's just not coming, okay? You're on your own there.
Okay. So,
no, I think he's coming. He's coming. Just a second.
Okay.
Probably at. We'll see if I receive any message from Costin.
Says in the chat that he's having some issues. Seems to be online, so maybe. Oh, he's online now. I'll invite him again on stage.
Okay.
He's getting ready. Okay, he was getting ready.
By the way, while we are waiting, we are quite surprised about the number of people that have registered until now. When we started the webinar a few hours ago, we had like 1,150 people that were registered, and during the live event, like 120 extra people registered. Why? Probably because people were making a promotion for the event. So at the moment we have 1,270 people that have registered, and let's say an average of somewhere we're around 600 people live during the event, which is a great success. In the meantime, my good old friend Costin check.
Yeah, can you guys hear me well?
Yep, I do hear you.
Yeah, sorry. Firefox
and Costin.
Firefox decided to act up. Sorry about that.
Okay, but that's not an issue. Besides, we're still on track. We're still on time, so no hurries. Costin, I'm not going to take much of your time. I know that you have a full presentation ready, so I suggest that you introduce you and your young colleague to the audience, and I would say the floor is yours, and good luck.
All right, thank you, Pedro, and hello everyone. Wonderful to see a lot of friends and in the chat, and of course I know that a lot of you have also attended the previous CCB event. Thanks to Pedro, Kevin, Miguel, and everybody else for putting it together. So, all right, we want to talk a bit about what we consider to be one missing link in the whole sunburst story. Before we start with that, a few words about our team, the Global Research and Analysis team at Kaspersky, which is the team that I am leading. Georgi is a junior researcher and he's been working with us for very little time. Our team has been operational since 2008, specializing mostly, let's say, in sophisticated threat analysis. When Eugene, back in the days, he realized that there's a lot of sophisticated things that kind of require special analysis, and this is how the team was created. As I said, our focus is mostly advanced persistent threats, critical infrastructure threats, financial threats, sophisticated targeted attacks. When Kaspersky was targeted in the same way as FireEye in the Duku2 attack, our team was the one who did the forensics and investigation and writing the report on that case. Now, most of you, I guess, are familiar with our research. We published in the past about various discoveries, including supply chain attacks such as ShadowPad or ShadowHammer. We've also published extensively on Turla, Sophacy, Zebracy, and so on. And to be honest, I guess that nowadays it is quite rare that we get to see a kind of completely new threat actor. So most of the activity that we see is generally either can be quickly associated with something that is known, or it can be traced to some previously known group. So the old days in which there was a massive, large, big announcement about some new threat actor are, well, unfortunately or maybe fortunately gone. So it's quite rare that you come by something 100% entirely new nowadays, which is of course why this whole incident attracted our attention. Now we try to kind of to look at what's going on in terms of APTs on a global level in a kind of, let's say, very uniform, distributed way, in the sense we try not to be biased towards any kind of specific region. We try to provide a more let's say balanced view of what's going on. So for instance, this is the top 10 significant threat actors that we have seen last year as active. I guess one of the newly kind of identified or talked about actors last year, they were Deathstalker. Again, Deathstalker, in a way you can say it's new, maybe not well documented in the past, but again, their activity can be traced all the way back to almost 2003 or 2004. So they've been around for some time. Again, other things such as I Am the King, Cactus Pete, Sophacy, Muddy Water, top our significant threat actors. We also monitor more than 900 operations. And just to give you an idea, about 20 of them are commercial. What do I mean by commercial? Those are like tools which are available for purchase, and offensive tools which can be purchased by whoever is interested in using them. Some of them, of course, are exclusively available to governments. I guess about 25 of these groups we're tracking are considered to be Chinese speaking, just to give you some numbers. Now, of course, the whole story of the SolarWinds hack is undoubtedly maybe the top cybersecurity story of the last year. It was kind of interesting how they presented it in the first place. The CEO of SolarWinds posted a message, I think it was on December 14th, in which he said that there is a potential vulnerability in the SolarWinds software. Obviously, I guess it's more lawyer-oriented language, but in reality, this potential vulnerability is quite real, so to say. And both FireEye and Volexity wrote with their analysis. I think the Volexity post is interesting because it kind of ties this activity back a bit, not that much, but a bit. And if anyone is definitely interested to understand more about this threat actor, looking back at their activity throughout the years can probably reveal more on their let's say intentions, interests, and so on. Now, we also published 2 blogs on this. One of them in December, 18 December, we realized that actually it's possible to decrypt the CNAME requests in the command and control mechanism of the Sunburst malware, which can allow for, let's say, the identification of the victims that were selected for second stage delivery. And we open sourced a tool which allowed us and others by using publicly open PDNS data to identify one US government organization as well as a big telecommunications company. In the meanwhile, we also identified at least 2 other targets that were selected for second stage exploitation. One of them, I think, is a private company. The other one also telecommunications related. And on January 11, this week, we published our analysis of the Sunburst backdoor and its overlaps with a previously known malware known as Qctr. Now, The inject, which originally appeared in the SolarWinds Orion Core Business Layer DLL, kind of, let's say, it was done in a very, I would say, professional way and very sneaky in the sense, wasn't that easy to spot for the automated systems that we have created. So after the last year's supply chain attacks, such as Shadow Hammer and ShadowPad, we built systems which are designed to identify supply chain attacks. What is interesting is that in November, the attackers initially added a small fragment of code to this DLL, which resulted in its size to be inflated from what it was before, around 500 kilobytes, was boosted to about 890 kilobytes. However, if you looked inside, there was no malicious code, but nevertheless, this file size was significant. Then in February, when the first malicious version was deployed, the file size change was very, very small. It was less than 100 kilobytes, which again made it invisible to a lot of supply chain detection technologies, such as the ones that we are running. So this is maybe just another proof or indication that this actor, they really know what they're doing, and some of the choices indicate a very, very, let's say, intelligent way of doing things. So all these, let's say, small decisions that we see throughout the code, they indicate some very, very careful thinking went into how this whole attack was designed and delivered. A few words about Qctr. Georgi will tell us more. It's a fully featured .NET backdoor. It was first reported by our colleagues from Palo Alto Networks in 2017. In their blogs, they said it may have been used by the Turla APT. Guess it wasn't really sure, and they also suggested maybe a replacement for the Turla Carbon platform. And the Turla Carbon platform has been, I guess it was really popular around 2012, 2014, together with the Epic backdoor. Now, in our own observations, we can confirm that in some cases, Qctr was indeed used together with other Turla tools during the last years. And actually, this is still in use. We've seen the last version is actually from January. It's already been updated since we wrote this slide December. So it's just from a few days ago. And what is interesting here, by the way, in terms of connections, Epic Turla, which is one of these early backdoors, it actually resolves imports using a customized version of the FNV1A hash. And it has code similarities with the Qctr's shellcode. So keep this in mind as we are trying to put together a picture and the connections between these malware families. This particular detail might become very important. So at this point, I want to ask my colleague Georgi to talk a bit about how Qctr's timeline and how it, let's say, attracted his attention. Georgi was initially the researcher on our side who found these interesting code fragments and overlaps that, let's say, we found very intriguing and we wanted to disclose. So I don't know, Georgi, if you want to share your screen from your side.
Can you see my screen right now?
Yes, I can. Yes, we can.
Okay. So hi, I'm Georgi Kucherin, and I'm the team member who discovered these similarities between Sunburst and Qctr. And now I would like to tell you what the similarities actually are. So the first thing which got my attention is the presence of an FNV1A hashing algorithm in both backdoors. So there are two versions of this algorithm, the 32-bit and the 64-bit one, and we'll encounter both of them during the presentation. And before I start talking about the actual similarities, as Costin already mentioned, Turla developers are great fans of modified FNV1A algorithms. Personally, I think they like it because it's kind of simple to implement. So as you can see here on the left, let me switch on the laser. So here it is. So here on the left, you just need to type a few lines of code. And speaking about the algorithm itself, you first initialize the output with this constant over here. It's called FMV1A offset basis. And at every iteration of that loop, you simply XOR the hash value with a byte of a string, and then you multiply this hash by another constant right here, and it's called FMV1A prime. As for the use of the FMV1A hash in Turla malware, you can encounter it in the Epic backdoor, which is discovered in 2014. And the customization which they did in the backdoor is that they just changed this initial constant over here. Speaking about KZOR, this backdoor also has a customized FMV1A algo inside the shellcode. It differs from the original implementation in the way that the multiplication constant is a bit different from the original one. As you can see here, its last digit is 7 instead of 3. And it's kind of funny that this multiplication constant is supposed to be a prime number, which means that it should divide 1 and itself, while the modified number is not prime at all. And this can make the modified hash more prone to collisions. So now, when we learned about how Turla uses the FMV1A hash, let's finally get back to the Sunburst versus KZOR comparison. So here on the left side, you can see the code which we found in KZOR. This is a new KZOR which we discovered in November 2020. And here, this method name, FMV1A custom, and these variable names, I actually place them myself because the initial code, it was obfuscated, and thus it's easier to read right here. So what this algorithm does is that it calculates the original FMV1A hash. So as you can see here, it initializes 3 constants, those the 2 constants output, and FMV1A prime. These are constants from the original 64-bit FMV1A algorithm. And here in a loop, it uses only those constants. And after this loop, it XORs the hash with a constant. And as you can see, this constant is quite strange, and it is not present in the original FMV1A code. So that's it about KZOR. And as for Sunburst, we see the same thing. Here's the loop which does the original FMV1A hash, and here's the custom XOR with a constant. And I have to mention that those constants in KZOR and in Sunburst, they are quite different. So here in KZOR, the first byte is 69, while in Sunburst, it is 5B. And I must also admit that the custom FMV1A with an XOR at the end, it's quite unique. So back in December, the community has put up a Yara rule which would detect such combinations of FMV1A and XOR. And it could only detect DLLs with a Sunburst backdoor in it. So this algorithm can be indeed considered rare. And one of the reasons why the Yara rule didn't detect KZOR is that in KZOR, a technique called constant unfolding is used. It's an obfuscation technique which replaces every constant, as you can see here, with an XOR of 2 constants. It can be actually much complex, but it's quite simple in here. But still, this obfuscation makes it more difficult to create efficient Yara rules. The second similar thing is the use of an MD5 plus XOR algorithm to calculate unique victim identifiers. So KZOR, it doesn't create any folders or files with non-unique names in order to avoid being detected with some kind of rules. And it derives unique strings from non-unique ones with the following algorithm. It first calculates the MD5 hash of an input string right here, and then here in a loop, it XORs this MD5 with a unique 4-byte value. Here it's unique PC identifier, and this identifier is actually the serial number of the volume where Windows is installed. And as a result of this operation, KZOR obtains a 16-byte GUID, which later gets converted to a hexadecimal string. As for Sunburst, the implementation is a bit more different. It first computes an MD5 from a set of data by concatenating a MAC address. Here's a function which gets it, and some more data, which is the computer domain and the machine GUID. And this text variable over here, it contains this concatenated data. And then it takes the MD5 of this string, and then it XORs the MD5 down to 8 bytes in this loop over here. So actually, it may seem that the two functions do return values of different sizes. So here in Qctr, this GUID is 16 bytes long, and in Sunburst over here, the output value is 8 bytes long. But still, if you look at the implementation itself, so this loop and this loop over here and the MD5, it looks very similar. And plus, the use of an MD5 plus XOR combination to generate unique strings, it isn't that common. So the last thing which I want to discuss is the implementation of the sleeping algorithms. Qctr and Sunburst, so when they need to sleep, they do not use some hard-coded time periods. Instead, they choose a random sleeping time in a range between two given values over here. So I suppose that this may have been done to attempt to evade some heuristic detection. And if you look at the implementations of the sleeping algorithm in Qctr and in Sunburst, here I'm comparing them side by side, so you'll notice that the developers of both backdoors have decided to stick to one algorithm of generating random numbers in a given range. And this method involves using this formula over here. So both backdoors first generate a random floating point number in the range of from 0 to 1, that's x over here, and they generate it with the next double method, both of them, so here next double and here next double, and then they multiply that x by the difference between the maximal and the minimal sleeping time. And then it adds the minimal sleeping time to the product. And as a result, the backdoors generate a random number from a given range. So indeed, if here in the formula x is 0, then the generated sleeping time will be equal to sleeping time min because the product will be 0. And if it's 1, then sleeping time minimal is going to cancel out and we'll get sleeping time max as a result. And if that x variable is between 0 and 1, the generated value will be between sleeping time min and sleeping time max. So another common thing between those two algorithms is that the two backdoors invoke the sleeping method in a loop. So here we can see a loop, and here we can see a loop. So although the random number generation code and the code inside the loop, they are not 100% identical, so these similarities may indicate that the developers of both Qctr and Sunburst actually went through a similar thinking process while they were coding the sleeping algorithm. And finally, both Qctr and Sunburst can sleep for quite long times before or in between the two connections. So by default, Qctr chooses a random sleeping time between 2 and 4 weeks, while Sunburst waits from 12 to 14 days. Also, Sunburst, just like Qctr, it implements a command which allows the operators to change the waiting time between two C2 connections, and such long sleep periods are not very common for typical APT malware. So, what do we have at the end of the day? We have spotted 3 similarities. First, we have the modified FMV1A hashing algorithm with an XOR at the end. It was introduced in Qctr in November 2020, and before this date, Qctr still implemented a 32-bit FMV1A algorithm in shellcode. Up next, we have the common MD5 plus XOR algorithm used to generate unique identifiers. Qctr heavily relied on this algorithm in versions discovered before November 2020. It XORs an MD5 of a string with a 4-byte volume serial number. And as for Sunburst, it computes MD5 from a larger set of data, and then it XORs the MD5 down to 8 bytes. And then, last but not least, we have a coincidence in the sleeping algorithm Both backdoors use the same formula, and they do splitting in a loop. And it's curious, just as the MD5 plus XOR, the formula involving the next double method disappeared from the new November KZOR for some reason. And it now uses a more orthodox way to generate random numbers in a range. So if you Google stuff like .NET generate random integer in a range, then this is the first formula which will actually appear on Stack Overflow. And as for the overlapping code on the whole, so it's not 100% similar. So for example, the XOR constants used in the FMV1A algorithm, they are not identical. And still, 3 of these coincidences are quite curious and seem kind of suspicious. And so that's all I wanted to say about the code similarities. And now I'll pass the virtual microphone to Costin, who will tell you what these code overlaps can actually mean.
Hi, Gary. Can you please stop sharing? Thank you. I'll share from my side. All right, some conclusions. We want to try to, let's say, make some sense of all of this, especially because it can be, I guess, very difficult to comprehend what it actually means. And one of the questions which appear pretty early, let's say, during our research on this discovery, is it like a false flag? And especially the, I guess, the Olympic destroyer attack comes to mind. A lot of false flags in there, some of them very subtle, and we were wondering, can this actually be a false flag? Maybe they just want to make it look like it's somehow connected to Qctr. Now, what is interesting here is that the Qctr developers, they introduced this custom 64-bit FNV-1A algorithm only in November 2020, which is actually after the Sunburst deployment. So if this is a false flag from the Sunburst, let's say guys from the UNC 2452, then they must have somehow predicted the actions of the Qctr developers. So they must have, let's say, somehow guessed in advance that they were going to use this algorithm as well. Or we were thinking maybe there's another theory here, that there is a sample of Qctr out there which was compiled before Sunburst, so that means before February 2020, that has the modified hash function inside, and it went unnoticed by everyone except the Sunburst developers. And well, this, I guess that it's a not very likely theory, because tracking new Qctr samples is not very trivial. And actually, throughout the summer of 2020, we've seen new Qctr samples that were using the old algorithm. So, so like, just to, let's say, summarize what's going on here is the FNV1A 64-bit, the modified algorithm, was actually first implemented in Sunburst, and it was only later adopted in Qctr, which I guess it makes this theory maybe a bit less likely. What are the possible meanings of this? Well, we can, let's say, go through some theories. We don't know exactly which one of these theories is true. But one of them, maybe Sunburst was developed by the same group as Qctr. That's one possibility, maybe. Or another idea is that the Sunburst developers used ideas or code from Qctr without having a direct connection. Another possibility, by the way, would be that they both obtained this malware from the same source, maybe some kind of an underground forum, although we haven't been able to find any underground forums that would be selling something similar to the Qctr source code. Well, another possibility is that maybe one of the Qctr developers moved to another team, taking his knowledge and tools with them. It also might suggest that they came back after the Sunburst, let's say, project. Or just the Sunburst developers introduced these subtle links as a form of a false flag in order to shift this blame to Qctr or another group. But as you have seen, there's some, let's say, technical issues there with this theory, because it's unclear who is copying whom. It's more likely it happened the other way around. Now, I guess one of the biggest questions which emerges from this research is it Turla? And I like to say, and we've said this before, we don't think so. And I know it can be quite confusing. How can this be similar to Turla or like malware like Qctr, but it's not Turla? Well, if we look at the typical Turla TTPs, and we've looked at Turla extensively throughout the years, there are some, let's say, many different ways in which, let's say, they don't look like typical Turla operations. So, for instance, this supply chain attack, the Cobalt Strike usage, the cloud and SAML abuse. Actually, if you look at the victimology, I guess the most significant recent Turla operation against U.S. government agency, that's Agent BTZ from around 2008. We haven't seen any significant Turla activity against U.S. government agencies since 2008. So I'm not saying it's not impossible that they suddenly became interested again, but again, well, we haven't just seen any such signs. And actually, the typical Turla activity that we see on a regular basis, that's mostly European Union Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Asia Ministry of Foreign Affairs, malware such as light neuron, dark neuron, IIS and exchange plugins for stealing emails or just persistence, a variety of backdoors, local PI-based command and control, Chinch and Comrade, satellite links for command and control. And actually, if you remember this famous 2015 DNC hack, well, Sophacy and APT29 were basically in that network doing their stuff. However, no signs of Turla. So because of these reasons, we don't really think that this is Turla. Well, why are these code fragments in Sunburst? We honestly don't know. Like I said, we have all these different theories that maybe was developed by the same group. The reality is that we really don't know which one is more likely. However, if you are to ask me, there must be some kind of reason for this. It can't. It's unlikely. Well, it's very unlikely that this is just a random coincidence. And this code appeared first in Sunburst and later only it appeared in Qctr. And throughout all these years, we see this almost in a way, if you want, parallel and connected development of different features, FNV hashes, MD5 Luxor, which indicate like a constant work of development between these groups. Now, one thing that I wanted also to mention, that maybe it's an explanation for this coincidences, if you want. Back in the days, we reported on the Dukes. In particular, we published a research on what we called Cosmic Duke, a malware used by this larger umbrella that is known as the Dukes. Some people also consider APT29, which is one of the names that has been seen in the media as possibly responsible for this hack. So we consider APT29 to be kind of part of this larger Dukes umbrella, if you want. So back in the days when we analyzed Cosmic Duke, we discovered that there were apparently three different kind of groups leveraging this Cosmic Duke malware. And in particular, one of those groups was using a web shell that we have also seen with Turla. So this raises the possibility that Turla are just, let's say, in some cases, also a customer of this malware that is, let's say, under the larger Dukes umbrella. Again, suggesting that potentially there's this attack has no links to Turla, but the connection is probably at some kind of a different level. So, like I said, some thoughts the nature of this relation is still not clear to us. Through analysis, it's possible that evidence confirming one or other theories might appear. What is very important to mention is that this overlap doesn't change much for defenders. Supply chain attacks are the most sophisticated types of attacks nowadays, and they've been successfully used in the past by APT groups such as WinNTI, Barium, APT41, as well as other cyber criminal groups such as Fin7, for instance. Defense against supply chain attacks is extremely difficult. And of course, question would be is how do you defend yourself against attacks such as this one? So I just wanted to leave some kind of final advice and thoughts, such as the usage of threat intelligence, identifying weak spots in advance definitely helps, as well as the identification of the actor behind the attack. There's also this detect and investigate using available intelligence on the APT once you know what to look for. Of course, the ability to search is important, and adaptive defense and monitoring based on TTPs, as well as correlating all the activities with actors and campaigns based on IOCs and TTPs. This is pretty much all that we wanted to show you. I would like to very quickly go through the questions in the chat to see if there is something. I think I've seen a few interesting ones. One of them, okay, Alexandre Dulanois. Hello, Alexander. He's asking us, don't you think that the author used the weak FNV1A to detect his own DNS entries generated from the DGA in the DNS queries response to give back the correct answer and discarding any other? It's an interesting question. I guess it depends a lot on, let's say, how they are looking and how they are identifying the weakness in these DNS queries. I mean, it can be done if you collect a large amount of the queries, but I guess one of the issues here would be that it would also suggest that other people might try to fake or flood them with this kind of DNS queries for this to be a, let's say, a legitimate concern. Well, if these are the only overlapping code fragments between the two ops by the similar actors, that is a very pretty good OPSEC. Do you want to comment on that? Well, there's no doubt that there is a very good OPSEC here, maybe one of the best that we've seen in our experience. And it's possible there are, let's say, maybe other mistakes we're not seeing yet. One of the, let's say, maybe kind of themes that we see a lot in malware is there is a difference, in many cases, there's a difference between the people who develop the malware, and there's the difference, let's say, between them and the people who operate the malware. I think the Canadian security establishment, oh no, was it the Communication Security Establishment of Canada, they have a presentation there on Turla where they speak about these different skills between the people who develop the tools and the people who operate them. So if there's maybe, let's say, very few mistakes in how these tools were written, and I guess a very important point here would be that these code similarities, they are not copy paste. In my opinion, for sure, there was no copy paste involved. What we are seeing more here are, let's say, the kind of the ripples in the code which come from something similar maybe to handwriting. It's just like it's a way that is kind of deeply intertwined in the way you do code, in the way you write code. So whenever, let's say, you use a hash, this is the first thing that comes to your mind. And the first time that you do this victim user ID calculation, the MD5 and XOR is the first thing that comes to your mind. So it's maybe, let's say, more akin to handwriting in a way. But if there are OPSEC mistakes, I guess they should be possibly in how this whole thing was operated. In terms of operations, that has a higher chance of having mistakes. And there's a question for Georgi. Maybe you want to answer this, Georgi,
Yeah.
from Maxime Thibault.
Yeah, thank you, Maxime, for your question. So, Qctr, it's a very large backdoor, and it's really difficult to track differences in it because a lot of code and they're constantly changing everything. Personally, I was amused by the fact that they changed a lot of things in 5 years. So as for the question, actually, it's by previous knowledge of Qctr. So I've analyzed this backdoor, and I had memories of this strange FMV1A hash. And when I actually look at the code of Sunburst, something in my brain told me that there were some similarities. And I looked at Qctr again, and I realized that it's it. So the FMV1A hash is inside it. So as for the Yara roles, we have, of course, made a weaker Yara role, which would detect Sunburst and Qctr, and we're currently waiting to discover some more, maybe some more Qctr samples, maybe something else related to the supply chain attack. So only time will tell. So, and do you have time for another question?
I think so. This question from Runa, I think you can also answer, Georgi. How long does Sunburst wait between C2 connections?
Okay, so thank you, Bruno, for your question again. So you have to distinguish here. So before it does any activity, it waits from 12 to 14 days. And when this time has passed, so this time it actually varies. It can be set by the C2 operators. So by default, it's from 30 minutes to 2 hours, if I'm not mistaken. But I also remember that if there was some error in it, so it will actually make the delays large, like up to 9 hours. So it's up to 2 hours by default. It can be changed by the C2 operators, and in case of an error, it can sleep for up to 9 hours. That's the answer.
Thank you. Think maybe it would be, by the way, if Pedro and Kevin can tell us how much more time we have, and if we should wrap up, just let us know. Maybe one last question. What can you tell us about the Sunspot malware, and if there are clear connection between the JetBrains breach to the SolarWinds chain attack? I guess very important one thing to say here: there is no proof or knowledge of any JetBrains breach to date. This was, I guess, a theory that was being investigated at some point, and I know there were publications in the media discussing this theory. But again, it's very important to say that that's all that it is, a theory, and there is no proof that JetBrains was breached in any way or connected. If, let's say, further technical evidence appears, that's of course very good. But at the moment, speaking exclusively from the point of view of technical evidence which is available, there's nothing that would indicate that JetBrains was breached or connected. And I see Pedro joined the call.
Yes, but if you still have the need to answer one question, let's say maybe a final one. Maybe, yes. I was starting to talk French. So yes, please do one last question before we can close this one.
One last question. There's one last question from Horia, which I guess is Romanian. Let me find it again. I think I've seen it in the chat, but was scrolling. It was mostly about if there's a reason to trust Kaspersky's products, and is it because we moved our location near Belgium? Like, to answer from our point of view, there were a lot of, let's say, unfounded allegations in the media back in 2016 about our company, and we've answered them all. To be honest, important to say also, there hasn't been any kind of evidence at any point that there was something going on. But what we did nevertheless was to create transparency centers around the world. We opened our first transparency center in Switzerland, in Zurich, where people can go and look at our source code. And at the same time, we try to be pretty open about how we do things. As you can see, there is no bias in what we research, analyze, or publish about. We research pretty much any kind of attack, and we publish about attacks which come from any side of the world. It doesn't matter what language they're speaking. We would still publish about, which maybe it's not something that you can see about every company out there. So I hope that kind of helps answer the question, but maybe a question to Pedro. Pedro, why do you trust me, or why do you trust us?
That's very simple. The official point of view from Belgium is that whatever that was discussed a couple of years ago is that we never have seen any official technical document about that. For us, yeah, we have no objective reports that prove that it's true what has been told about Kaspersky. So for us, Kaspersky was and still is a partner. Okay, Costin and Gorge, thank you very much for this very, very, very interesting presentation. I think it has opened again a few eyes. Conclusion is attribution is and will always be very difficult, even if you find a lot of overlaps in code. Costin also wants to thank you that you have given Gorge the chance to be with us. He's a young researcher, maybe the new Costin. So thank you for giving this opportunity to a young researcher. It's important that we support him. In that case, I will close the presentation here. I have a few closing remarks, and I hope that Miguel is available. He just texted me that he should be able to give the closing remarks, but without camera. Miguel, are you out there, or do I have to close the session? I don't think that Miguel is able to join. In that case, then I'll have to do it. I think that it was an interesting, or it was a very interesting afternoon. One of the main thoughts is that if we want to continue to keep our infrastructure cyber safe, then we have to collaborate. The good guys have to share. It's all about good CTI and exchange information. CCB is hoping to do that on several ways. We share a lot with our constituents. We always look for new partners all over the world. If you want to work with us, if you want to exchange information with us, you can always contact us on ews@cert.be. And for the rest, I really hope that we can continue with our Qctr. We brought 1,300 people together today. We exchanged a lot of information. I think that's the way to go, and that's the way how we can make our cyber lives a little bit more secure. For the rest, thank you very much for joining us, and keep it safe, and I hope to see you next time. Kevin?
Yep. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Thank you, Pedro, for being a host of this event. I just wanted to say that Miguel, he's online, but I can't invite him on stage, so maybe there is some technical issue there.
Okay.
So,
okay.
Thanks to all the speakers and to everyone joining. See you next time, maybe on the 22nd of April. Goodbye.
See you. Bye-bye.